Steve, huh? He's a character in this game, and he's quite broken, actually. It's funny, before he was announced at all, I thought the idea of Steve being added to Smash, and him somehow being really strong was kind of amusing. Just the thought of adding the blocky guy from Minecraft, and him somehow ending up as an actual viable character, was one of those things that just seemed so far-fetched. Well, both of those things happened, and believe me, it was a little bit funnier when it was just a joke. But here we are. We got this guy running around causing all sorts of problems, to the point where banning the character outright has been heavily discussed. So how did we get here? How did this character end up being so imbalanced? There's a lot to say on the topic, and I feel like this character is a very interesting case. A lot of strange design decisions came together to create this truly baffling character. It's almost impressive the amount of ways this character manages to uproot the various aspects of this game that makes it what it is. From mechanics that turn the game on its head to moves that I can't believe God actually made. Upkeeping the long tradition of every Smash game having a flagship broken character, even when it did seem like Ultimate would be the one to break the chain. And, well, that's what I'm going to look at here today. What makes this character so strong, and how did we even get to this point? So in order to get some perspective, I think we should start at the beginning. Smash Ultimate released in 2018. It's important to understand that when the game was first released like this, it was actually very balanced. While it had some edges that needed to be smoothed out, most of which were taken care of through patches soon thereafter, but at the time around release, there was no clear best character in the game, and the margin between the arguably best character and second best character were so thin that it basically didn't matter. It is very clear that the dev team spent a lot of time and effort making the game like this, and I think they actually did a truly amazing job. It's genuinely impressive to make a game with this many characters in it and not have one of them end up being notably better than everyone else, and at the same time have a large majority of the characters end up being viable at least, even if they're not amazing. This is particularly sad seeing how things are going to change drastically down the line. Now, games having DLC has become very standard, and Smash is no exception. Starting back in Smash 4, Smash would see characters and stage DLC often included in packs with corresponding characters. The reception to DLC was largely positive, and I'm sure Nintendo's bottom line didn't feel too bad about it either, so DLC was here to stay, and it was then to no one's surprise that just one day before Ultimate released, we were teased with Fighters Pass 1, and Joker being the first character to join it. Technically, Piranha Plant was the first DLC character, however he was announced way before the game came out, and was actually free to download for a while after the game released, so I almost don't really count him. However, with Joker we had the first Fighters Pass, a DLC pass where you purchased access to new characters as they were being developed. Smash players have been wary of DLC ever since Smash 4. A lot of the DLC characters end up being really strong, to the point where they started heavily over-centralizing the metagame. These characters were clearly pushed in terms of power level. I guess the idea is that less people would want to buy the DLC if they ended up being weak, although I don't really believe that mentality is correct. Regardless, they really made sure these characters were good, and in fact they were very good. Way too good in some cases, which led to the most iconic Broken Smash character probably right after Meta Knight, that being Bayonetta, who single-handedly brought an emergency patch whose only goal was to nerf Bayonetta, and even after this she went on to totally dominate the metagame. It was then surprising to see how good Fighters Pass 1 was. Between April of 2019 and January 2020, 5 characters were released that would end up being the first, and at the time only known Fighters Pass. The characters being Joker, as I mentioned before, Hero, Banjo, Terry, and Byleth. Joker was recognized early as a potential top tier, and arguably the best character in the game at the time. Hero, while ruffling some feathers because of his, shall we say, unique design and admittedly real language barrier issues, ended up not causing too many problems, and being fairly underwhelming in terms of actually getting notable results. Banjo is likely the least strong character out of the bunch, along with Hero, which needless to say meant he didn't cause any problems. It was however during Banjo's announcement stream that they also announced a second Fighters Pass, which would be released after the first one concluded, something that was widely celebrated as more characters being added is always fun. Later into Fighters Pass 1, Terry was added, who is an interesting case since he has by far the most DLC kind of mechanics in the form of Go Mode, being able to absolutely steal some stocks in the right conditions. Though overall he is far from broken, being held back by similar things that hold back Ryu and Ken. Byleth, while definitely being better than people thought at first, was a perfectly fine character. The only reason this character saw a lot of high level placements is because MKLeo decided to pick up the character, kinda similar to what he did with Joker earlier. Neither character would have nearly as good tournament results if it were not for him, and I kinda feel like that's worth mentioning. When all said and done, being able to look back at Fighters Pass 1 in hindsight, especially knowing what Fighters Pass 2 would bring, I think they did a great job making fun characters. Some of which are quite strong, but not so strong to the point where we have another Bayonetta on our hands. It seemed like they had learned their lesson from Smash 4, and Fighters Pass 1 is proof of that. The meta was in a healthy place. No characters were even remotely close to being the undisputed best character, so going into the second Fighters Pass, there was not really a lot of reason to be alarmed. Little did we know that Fighters Pass 2 was about to change the meta dramatically. Fighters Pass 2 introduced 6 characters: Min Min, Sephiroth, Pyra Mithra, Kazuya, Sora, and Steve. This would be the beginning of a drastic change in how characters were designed in this game. Sephiroth and Sora are the only 2 characters out of them that kind of feel like they were made in the same spirit of Fighters Pass 1. They too definitely walked the line in some ways, but I feel there was enough attention put into them to make sure they didn't go overboard. Pyra and Mithra are simply extremely pushed characters. I don't think they cause any real problems besides just having been designed to be really good at basically everything except for recovery, which makes them a little bit dull characters in my opinion. It's almost kind of impressive that they managed to make them this powerful without making them break the game. Min Min and Kazuya, on the other hand, I believe have some questionable design decisions that leave these characters feeling very polarizing in ways few other characters have been before. I could talk about the general issues I have with Fighters Pass 2 for hours, but we're not really here to do that, because in the midst of this Fighter Pass there was a diamond in the rough, the gold medalist of the many pushed Fighters Pass 2 characters, whose iron grasp over the meta seems unyielding. A character that would end up leaving a profound mark on the meta and the community as a whole. Steve is a broken character, defining broken as way more powerful than the devs intended, with a combination of unique mechanics that make him able to pull off things no other character can dream of, to moves that are blatantly just too strong in ways that feels almost unnatural. It would not be too out there to say that this character is the best character in the game, if not one of the strongest characters in all of Smash history. And all of this might seem a little weird. How did it end up like this? The number one thing that usually is the biggest factor in what makes a top tier is movement, which Steve is really bad at. He's very slow on the ground and in the air, having some of the worst mobility stats across the board. They tried something similar with Bayonetta in Smash 4, making her all around very slow. However, they did also give her some crazy movement options in the form of her specials to make up for that, allowing her to have some really good movement despite that. Steve doesn't really have anything like that. I mean, he kinda does, but it's not as useful for actually getting around quickly. His weight is average, coming in at 92, which means he's not gonna go out early, but he won't live for too long either. In the air he has very low gravity, which makes him floaty, something that should leave him quite vulnerable while in the air, and combined with his abysmal airspeed, he should be nothing more than a sitting duck when he's in the air. He really does have a lot holding him back on paper, so why in practice does it not play out like that? To compare Steve to the 2 previous broken top tiers of Smash 4 and Brawl, Brawl Meta Knight is probably the strongest on the face of it. In Brawl, balance was a much smaller concern, and also there was just less people in charge of that specifically, which allowed something like Brawl Meta Knight to happen. His competition just not really being able to stand up to the character, and him having basically anything you could ever need and a bag of chips. However, you still very much need to know how to pilot the character. You can't just pick him up and instantly see results. Bayonetta is a little bit of a different story, however. The reason she's broken is not the overall moveset just being too good. You see, what made Bayonetta broken was just a simple combination of a few moves. There's obviously a lot more to this character than that, but to make a long story short, these 2 moves really are the root of all evil this character can do. All you essentially needed to do to vastly increase your performance was to learn how to utilize these 2 moves, which would often make you able to rack up extreme damage in a single combo, or outright KO your opponent off the top of the screen. This was demonstrated by a huge influx of players who previously had decent results, suddenly performing at a top 8 level. Now, when it comes to Steve, however, the situation is a lot less clear. You can of course cite some pretty outrageous examples, like up tilt combos, Minecart being way too good, moves KOing absurdly early, but those are all just their own twisted branches of this terrifying tree. No, I want to start by looking at the root of the issue. We'll be going through all of his moves, because I really do think they're all worth talking about, but there are 4 moves I want to give special attention to. The 4 horsemen of the Steve-pocalypse. Okay, it sounded a lot better in my head, but we're sticking with it. However, out of all these moves, there's one that I think is somehow a tier above the rest. It is a single move that is the core issue for why this character is broken the way he is. It's blocks. Blocks completely tear this game apart, and I'm not saying that just to exaggerate. The game, in fact, did have to be totally reworked in certain areas in order to account for this inclusion, as stated during the introduction video for the character after his announcement, which is pretty wild and unprecedented. Now, besides that witty remark, blocks actually, in fact, do tear this game apart, in the literal way that it takes the core gameplay of Smash, that all other characters are defined for, and totally turns it on its head. Blocks themselves are a little bit strange. As you could expect, they act like a solid surface that cannot be ran through. This is of course what makes them so strong. Steve will always make a block of the lowest value material that he has access to, and all of them have differing amounts of HP. All blocks lose 1.2 HP per second, so they will go away after a while by themselves. However, waiting it out like this is usually never recommended, since it takes a really long time. Dirt blocks have 8 HP, wood blocks have 12, stone have 16, and iron blocks have 20 HP. And herein lies one of the first problems with these moves. They just kinda gave the blocks too much HP. It creates a massive problem for a lot of characters that kinda kinda just can't break them down fast enough, relative to how fast Steve can just build more, especially once you get into stone and iron blocks. But even wood blocks will sometimes take more than one hit if they're freshly placed. The threshold of 12 HP specifically is actually a very significant one, since a lot of aerials deal just shy of that mark, and breaking blocks with ground moves can be very risky if you don't have too much range to work with. Obviously it does depend on the character, but when stone blocks are brought out, basically no other character can cleanly destroy them with a single aerial, unless you're like Ganon or something. Now, if you recall my banned stages video, one of the most common reasons why stages are banned is because of walls and ceilings. They generally just cause a lot of issues, making you able to live way too long if you have a wall behind you. So you could imagine that blocks would cause a lot of issues when you can just freely create walls and ceilings on stages, or kinda be fundamentally ban-worthy since it brings a banned element into the game like this. Well, in that sense, characters like Diddy Kong would also need to be on the suspect list, seeing how he managed to smuggle a banana peel into the game, which is an item, which are banned. And yeah, I mean, blocks can make for some pretty silly situations. You can be prevented from recovering if you don't know how to deal with the blocks. Stage spiked on stage if you get grabbed in the wrong spot and there's a block out. He can stall in the air and make it easier to land. Steve can in fact also make a wall behind him and tech incoming attacks and survive. There are a lot of small edge cases where blocks cause weird and unpredictable outcomes, but usually these don't come about that often in normal gameplay, and none of these things are what pushes blocks over the edge. You see, the problem with blocks is that it allows you to create the wall. The wall is a simple 3-block structure, usually in the shape of 3 blocks on top of each other, but sometimes slight variations can be used. This is what makes blocks so good. Being able to create a dividing line in the middle of the stage not only changes how the characters need to approach each other, but also just the entire dynamic of how the game is played. So let me just kinda explain what I mean by this. Smash is, at its core, a game about control. Stage control, that is. The more of the stage you have access to, the better of a position you will generally find yourself in. As you fight, you get launched further and further back, meaning you'll lose more control of the stage every time. This is what causes the dynamic gameplay we all know and love. This concept is frequently referred to in fighting games as neutral, advantage, and disadvantage. In Smash, it basically corresponds directly to how much access to the stage you have. When the match starts, you're both in an even playing field, with equal amounts of control over the stage. And these situations where you generally have the same amount of stage control is referred to as neutral. Here, both players will attempt to launch their opponents away from the stage or up into the air, so they can gain control of the ground, which brings us to advantage and disadvantage states, which are kinda like scales tipping in favor of one player. They kinda have to exist at the same time, where one player is lacking control and the other one has more control. The best example of this is obviously the ledge. If you find yourself hanging on the ledge, you essentially have no stage control, while your opponent has the whole stage to themselves. Your options here are severely limited, and if you mess up you could take some serious damage or lose your stock really early. Being above the stage is also considered disadvantage. When you're in the air, your defensive options are limited, and you naturally only have your aerials to work with, and since you're falling of course, your opponent will basically know when you're gonna come down and try to punish you for that. And at this time, your opponent has all their tools to try to catch your landing. Look no further than being at the receiving end of an endless barrage of Game & Watch up airs. Naturally enough, advantage is the inverse of this, where you are the one looking down at your poor opponent on ledge. You now find yourself in a situation where you have access to the whole stage to use as you like. Having stage control is good for 2 big reasons. It forces your opponent to make rash and unsafe options, and allows you to have more space to play with in order to make your options more safe. You might be able to see why creating a big wall in the middle of the stage would be a bit of an issue then. It inherently disrupts the balance of neutral, advantage, and disadvantage. Now we have a wall that one of you needs to get over or destroy, which can be used to tech otherwise lethal attacks, or cause some weird interactions. However, this alone is not really enough to be a huge problem, if it weren't for a little mechanic called mining. Mining, or mining/craft/place block, as it's actually referred to in the game, is actually a surprisingly complex mechanic, and we're going to dive into it in the next section here. Every stage in the game, and I mean every stage in the game, has a unique layout for how Steve's mining works. All surfaces are attributed one of 5 different terrain types, that affects how much of a certain resource type shows up. These are dirt, wood, stone, iron, and neutral. Some stages have several of these at once, while some only have one. The best example of this is probably New World, where the stage has a few of each type as a part of its ground. Each terrain type follows its own pattern for how frequently a certain resource shows up. This pattern is predetermined and will always appear in the same order, so the resources you get are not random. The resources you can get are the following: dirt and the retextured equivalents of it, which do behave exactly the same by the way, wood, stone, iron, gold, diamond, and redstone. At the start of the game, and I mean at the first stock only, Steve starts out with 36 units of dirt, 18 units of wood, 3 units of iron, and around 2 redstone. However, on a later respawn, he's actually given back the 3 iron and redstone if it doesn't have any. Dirt is simply here to be a cheap way to create blocks. It can't be used for much else than being placed as blocks, and have the lowest HP overall. It can, however, be a part of moves that spend any resource like TNT and minecart tracks, but we'll talk about that later. Wood and stone are here for crafting their respective tools, and can also be placed as blocks if you're out of dirt. However, since you start with wooden tools, you won't be making them too often, since you always craft tools out of the highest valued resource you have in your meter. Gold is a little unique since you can't use it for blocks, and it appears outside of the meter. You can make tools with it, however, and it's also used to make minecart more powerful. Iron is pretty much the same as stone, being both stronger as a tool and a block. Redstone, on the other hand, is a pretty weird resource that is only used in tandem with other moves, which I'll mention when we get into the later moves as well. Finally, diamond is the rarest resource and allows you to craft diamond tools, which are just absurdly powerful. The speed in which you mine through the pattern is dependent on the material the tool is made out of, as well as which tool is being used. For example, in dirt terrain, Steve uses the shovel, while in other terrains he uses pickaxe for stone, iron, and neutral, while wood uses the axe. This is somewhat important since tools do have durability, and will break if you use them to mine alongside attacking. The terrains also affect how fast you're able to mine, with iron terrain being the slowest to mine, then stone, which again takes longer than neutral. Lastly, as a bit of a weird extra note, when you mine gold and redstone, you gain 4 gold and 3 redstone respectively, which I actually didn't know until researching this video, because the game makes no effort to make this clear. I guess you're just supposed to know by gold not going away after you use the first one, but it's pretty significant because it gives you a lot more powered minecart than just a single gold wood. Now, on the surface, mining might seem innocuous enough. It's the way that Steve can acquire resources to fuel his attacks and craft tools. And to explain why it's a bit of an issue, we need to look at one of the design philosophies that Smash follows, that being the way they design strong chargeable moves, which might sound a little off topic, but I promise we'll get there. Smash has a few of these, and they're usually really good moves, like Charge Shot, Aura Sphere, Shadow Ball, Fruit, Limit, and can be seen in some other ways like Deep Breathing, or even to some extent with Levin Sword. These moves ask you that you spend a little time charging them so they can be really good moves. Depending on how you look at it, this can really be both a good and a bad thing. In one sense, requiring them to be charged to be good means you inevitably have to give up some time to actually charge them. It would obviously be better if the moves didn't need to be charged. However, of course, if that was the case, they would never have been allowed to be this strong in the first place. It's a cost to be paid, but paying the cost is often worth it, and having the option is generally a good thing. They used to be kinda strict with this too, like before Ultimate, Samus was not even allowed to charge her neutral B in the air. They wanted you to sit your ass down and charge that thing. But why am I bringing this up? Steve doesn't have any chargeable moves, you might say. And yeah, that's correct. But what he has is actually so much better and a lot more problematic. When Steve wants to use certain moves, place a block or craft a tool, he needs the corresponding resources. Steve acquires these resources by mining around for them. This effectively uses the same framework as any of the other moves. Steve needs to spend time mining in order to get certain moves later. Much like the reward of getting to use a full charge shot, Steve gets to use Minecart or Anvil. And it's here where I have to be honest with you. You see, I was actually being a little bit disingenuous when I said that chargeable moves are a bit of a drawback. They are actually mostly just a good thing. And that's because chargeable moves strongly incentivizes your opponent to approach. Like, are you just gonna stand there and watch them get away with charging their really strong projectile? Or Cloud get a free limit? No, you're gonna run in there and try to stop your opponent. After all, when they are in the charging animation, their options are a little bit limited. Now, approaching in Smash is usually viewed as a negative. There's a lot to be said about this topic, but generally approaching makes you have to take risk. You have to throw out an option and hope that it works, while your opponent can just wait and see if you overextend and punish you for that, which is generally a lot safer. This, most of the time, is not really a problem, since characters that excel at long range are usually bad up close, so your approach is usually rewarded. Most characters in this game are also just really not big fans of turtling, and usually benefit more from playing a more aggressive bait and punish game plan. Usually whichever player has to approach is dependent on who is in the lead. It's just kind of one of those unwritten rules of Smash, seeing how should you not approach or play too passively when you're behind, the timer might run out, and you'll therefore lose the game by having more damage on you. This usually never has to happen outside of a few particularly miserable matchups, but it is something you have to be aware of, since it is a valid way to get a win. Like I mentioned, chargeable moves incentivize approaches. They have this move where if they charge it all the way, they end up with something that's worth more than the time they spend charging it, so optimally you want to prevent that, seeing how you probably don't have something yourself. However, the big thing to note here is that you still have the option not to approach. Sure, it will suck to give them a deep breathing or limit or a shard shot for free, but once that's charged, they don't gain anything else from charging it more. Now they actually have to spend it before they can charge it again. Some of them, like deep breathing and limit, even have time limits, meaning they are in turn encouraged to approach before it runs out. If you think you can deal with a few stronger than usual moves coming your way, then you still have the option to not approach if you don't want to. Steve does not give you this option. Steve's mining outright forces approaches, and I think this is one of the main things that breaks Steve as a character. His ceiling for mining is practically endless. The more Steve mines, the more minecarts, anvils, and diamond tools he'll be able to use. Meaning you can't just wait it out, you have to stop him or he will gain a huge advantage on you. This is a feature unique to Steve entirely in all of Smash history, the ability to use a single move to continuously farm advantage. Like, imagine if characters like Samus or Pac-Man could store several charge shots or several bells or keys at once. That would be crazy and cause the characters to be way more focused around running away and hoarding chargeable advantage, you know, more so than they already do. There's a reason why they didn't do this, and I think Steve is the living embodiment of why it's a pretty good design principle to stick with. Just being able to essentially always force your opponent to approach is good enough already, but combined with blocks, it basically forces you into a disadvantageous position, all within the range of a single B button. In every other matchup you are at least on equal ground, but here it's a constant goose chase, and one you don't have a say in. This usually culminates in a very common scenario of you having to deal with the wall. It usually looks like this, where Steve puts up the wall and is mining on the other side. Until you can get around it, Steve will continuously gain resources, meaning you have to act fast. The easiest option, of course, is to break down the walls between us, which is easier said than done, and it is in this situation where Steve really shines, having a ton of options to punish people who break down the wall, or alternatively try to jump over it. It quite literally puts you in a guessing position without you ever having made a single mistake in the first place. It becomes a mind game where you have to try to get through while Steve mines and tries to stop you, and your reward for getting through is simply a shot at actually hitting Steve. He still has all his usual defensive options while the wall is down, and this is at its core what makes Steve a pretty inherently unbalanced character. Interacting with the wall in any way is risky, much in the same way that regular approaching can be risky. You're now forced to gamble at Steve's casino, and the house always wins in the long run. Steve can throw out a really good projectile or smash tag while you're attacking the wall. If you jump over it, you'll be greeted with the most crazy up tilt in the entire game. All of this just to have a single chance to hit him. You're really damned if you do and damned if you don't. Now, of course you can get through. It's far from impossible. However, just the fact that this is now an additional obstacle that you have to deal with outside of dealing with Steve regularly makes this one of the most oppressive aspects of the character. It changes the game completely, in a way that no other character even comes close to. Without harping on this too much longer, just keep this in mind when we talk about his moves later. While we usually may just view his moves in a vacuum, it's in this context where those moves go from just being really good to the perfect tools he needs for keeping people out. Before we move on, I just want to mention a few things I find quite baffling about blocks. I know there's more somehow. First up is the block hurt box, because while it might not be a huge deal, it's just so indicative of this character in general. You see, the actual detection hurt box for other hitboxes is not a square. All hitboxes in Smash are spheres or capsule shapes. They don't make actual hit boxes. You can probably see why this might be a bit of a problem, trying to fit a circle into a square like this. Well, the result is that the blocks have a pretty major blind spot. It looks like this, and honestly, how on earth did they think this was fine? Like, it does not even reach the sides of the block. Keep in mind that the detection for movement on the sides of the block, for things like stopping you from going through it and walking on top of it, is totally different and works perfectly. This one is specifically for getting hit by other moves, and they must have chosen to make it deliberately smaller than the actual block size. The real thing to note here is that the block sides act exactly the same as real walls in Smash. Now, the pretty obvious problem with this is that moves like projectiles will collide with the wall detection and get cancelled before they even have the chance to hit the block hurt box, meaning blocks will sometimes just nullify projectiles outright. I can't imagine this was intentional, but it looks so obvious that I can't imagine they were not aware of it when playtesting the character. For most other hitboxes in the game, you won't have this problem too often, since a vast majority of the hitboxes do not interact with the wall detection at all. However, there are a handful of hitboxes that still get screwed over by this. Slimmer hitboxes will also lose some range because they need to be way closer than you would actually think. There's not really that much more to say about this really. I just think they should have made it a more normal hitbox. You know, one that maybe actually matches the visual. And it's not like this matters that much, it's mostly just the problems with the projectiles. But it's just another random upside Steve gets for free, and I don't really think it should be like this. Blocks are very good off stage. If you place blocks close to the ledge, you may be able to outright block people from being able to recover, which is just another matchup check you have to be aware of. Where Steve can place blocks actually depends on the stage entirely, and the current legal stages actually do have some differences. If we look at the block grids, which I suppose I should explain real quick, the green area is where Steve can place blocks normally. The red area will still allow Steve to place them, but they will deteriorate faster. The grayed out area will not allow Steve to place blocks at all. Every legal stage in the game allows you to place blocks under the ledge, with the exception of Pokemon Stadium 2 for some reason. Blocks offstage cause a whole bunch of problems, and can be really tricky to deal with if you're unprepared. Even if you have a hitbox on your recovery, it might still be able to deny you from grabbing the ledge, since some of the blocks have a lot of HP. There are some formations that can be really hard to get through, and it also depends a lot on the angle you're trying to recover at. However, if you can just get to the ledge grab range, you will be fine actually. You can slide up against the wall to achieve this, so there is some pretty solid counterplay you can employ, but it really depends on your character, and some characters can have a way harder time getting back. It's also just, again, that Steve gets all this for free with his neutral B. Just more things you have to worry about besides actually fighting the character, which is complicated enough already. Overall, blocks warp the game in a way that no other move does. They make approaching difficult, something compounded by the fact that you really don't have a choice, seeing how Steve will gain a constant incremental advantage on you, for as long as you leave him alone. Having all this contained in just a single button press is what makes this character so strong. If you're one of the few characters that can deal with blocks well, you still have to actually fight the rest of the tools Steve has. Blocks are possibly the single most powerful move in all of Smash history, at least when viewed in the context of this game. However, while blocks are definitely the most powerful aspect of this character, we are far from done exploring the depths of what Steve can do. It may be hard to believe now, but there was a solid period of time where the public consensus on Steve was actually quite divisive.
So how do you feel about Steve?
He's weird. I heard a lot of people saying, you know, he's goofy, but he's not great. And then everybody said he was the best in the game and blah, blah. You know that stuff that people say.
Yeah.
And now people are back to like, he's okay.
Some of his more degenerate strategies had not quite been cooked up yet, or were believed to not be quite as consistent as they ended up being, and he was far from optimized in many other ways. As a result, people were not quite sure where to place him. He was seen as a slow, clunky character with some really weird mechanics tied up to him, like placing blocks on stage. How good could that really be? Of course, what makes Steve as good as he is not really the easiest thing to just gauge on a quick look. That's kinda why this video is as long as it is. Some of the more basic aspects of the characters were discovered really fast, of course. Like, people didn't doubt how good diamond tools were, or how powerful some of his specials were, but it was just kinda hard to tell how practical and realistic they were when weighing them against his presumed weaknesses. People really needed some hands-on experience with the character before they could say anything for certain. And as it turns out, there would be quite a while until they had a chance to do that, because Steve was released on October 13th, 2020, narrowly avoiding the award of being the worst thing to happen to the game that year. Needless to say, tournaments were not currently happening, and online tournaments are, well, you know, online. And as we all know, Ultimate is known for its stellar online, making it just not a good time to prove any character's viability, with some characters being a lot better online than offline and so on. So all of the speculation around Steve would remain just that, speculation, and it did for quite a while. He was dropped right in the middle of the biggest tournament drought in Smash history. It would not really be until fall of 2021 that tournaments would start to happen again. This resulted in one very unfortunate thing. Steve went completely under the radar when it came to balance patches. Despite the fact that several patches were released in the coming years, none of them changed Steve in any meaningful way. He was included in some of them, but the changes were largely bug fixes that came as a result of Minecart and blocks, some of which are kinda still in the game, by the way. Steve's power level was very clearly hard to pin down, both on the players and the developers front, so there wasn't much outcry for Steve being nerfed in the first place, which makes sense, since how would we know? There were no tournaments to gather data from. The opinion of the character would slowly rise throughout the coming year, however. The combination of his performance in online tournaments, and giving the character some time to develop, started to shape the vision of what the character really could do. But until we got some more tournaments going, it would be really hard to prove how good he actually was. Of course, by then it was already too late. The final balance patch was released on December 1st, 2021, over a year after Steve's inclusion. Nintendo has some really strange policies when it comes to patching their games. I've been over my disagreements in how the patches were implemented in the past, how they focus on buffing weird and arbitrary aspects of some characters, resulting in characters being buffed on paper, but the changes being so small that they don't actually cause the character to be much stronger. I have a whole video on this I made a while back, if that should interest you. All of this was fine back then, when the game was in a bit more of a balanced state. As in, before Fighters Pass 2. If a balance patch dropped and it was a bit of a dud, then who cares, the game was already in a good place. The problem with Smash's balance patches is that they were nearly always released together with some kind of content drop, and rarely outside of that. It makes it feel like it's just another side order to the meal you bought, as opposed to a tool that exists to ensure the game stays in a healthy place. It should not surprise you then, that when the final piece of DLC dropped, only a single balance patch was added afterwards. To say that this was a bit reckless is an understatement. Releasing a whole batch of DLC characters, a majority of which are heavily pushed, only to then shut the lights off and leave is just asking for trouble. I can only imagine, since none of the devs saw anything wrong with these characters, and the player base didn't have any huge complaints, they thought it would be fine to shelve the game and move on. Of course, this is not the case. Fighters Pass 2 was released during a hazy time competitively, with no results to back up claims. If I said, I think Steve is the best character in the game, then that's really all there is to it. Smash players already really love speculating on characters' viabilities, and many times they are wrong about it. Results really are the only solid rack you can hang your opinions on when it comes to this game. People used to think Shulk was a secret top tier in Smash 4, and turns out he was really bad. People used to think Shulk was a secret top tier in Ultimate, and well, I mean, he's a lot better, but not quite top tier. If you look back at people's tier lists from years ago, you'll see so many bizarre placings. And that's because figuring out a character's viability just takes time. That's natural. So I totally get the reluctance to introduce any major balance changes to these characters with so little feedback to go on. If you're going to do something as drastic as nerf a character, I feel it's only fair that you have a good reason to do so, with solid points to back it up. So I do get that when they made the final balance patch, they didn't want to take shots in the dark and hope they hit the right mark, not caring who was caught in the crossfire. However, that just really leaves me wondering why on earth they decided that should be the final patch. I doubt the game is locked so far away in the Nintendo vault that it would be a huge hassle to dig it up again, so it must be some kind of policy that just decides that this was the last one, to make the game get some time to finally simmer and officially stop development for the game. I guess their idea is just to let sleeping dogs lie, even if that dog is like sick and could really use some medicine right now. Which is, of course, a shame, because a solid balance patch right now could really reinvigorate this game. To the people who claim Nintendo does not keep an eye on competitive Smash, this is demonstrably untrue. I am sure Nintendo is well aware of how broken Steve is. They had a solid grasp on which characters were top tiers and which deserved to get nerfs and which didn't. They were clearly paying attention to the meta of the game. If they truly didn't care, then they wouldn't have bothered with any of this. I don't know to what extent anyone who worked on this game still follows Smash since the last patch, but I feel it's basically impossible someone there has not gotten the word on the wind that Steve ended up being quite unbalanced, which just makes it hurt all the more because of this seemingly set-in-stone policy. They are completely unwilling to go back and do more patches, even when the game could really use one now more than ever. It was fairly irresponsible, in my opinion, to throw all these characters into the game at a time where there was no real way to see if they were over the line or not. All these characters kinda got to hide behind a smokescreen until the threat of nerfs was already gone. For whatever reason, they chose to draw a hard line in the sand, and once they crossed it, they did not look back. And the time they drew this line was just too early. I understand wanting the game to be complete at some point, to not constantly go back and tweak things, especially since it's been so long since the last one. Sure, doing a patch has some minor consequences, it destroys your replays, which is a little bit of a shame, but at this point I really wouldn't mind it, just looking at the massive amount of replays I don't even remember saving. I do believe that if they just kept supporting the game, with just balance patches for 1 or 2 years, they would have easily been able to catch some of the really silly stuff that came as a result of Fighters Pass 2, and I think that really is the greatest shame when it comes to Smash's patches. Smash still has live events, I don't really know why. I can't say I've ever heard, like, anyone ever talk about these, let alone actually participate in them, but you get a pop-up about them every once in a while, so someone is still involved in upkeeping this game in some way at least. It's not like the game is truly buried yet. So is it so much then to ask for just one final patch? Well, yeah, probably. I doubt it will ever happen. Maybe if Ultimate Deluxe gets announced for Switch 2, we'll see some changes. But for this game, I think the train has left the station a long time ago. So, without any threats of getting nerfed, in the midst of the haze and smoke, the dragon slept still, laying dormant waiting for someone to awaken him, which, as we would see, would not take too long. Minecart might be one of the single most crazy moves to ever pass playtesting in this game. Like, I kinda get how they thought blocks would not be as problematic as they are, since it was a very unusual move, with unusual consequences. But Minecart, on the other hand, is just a move that I think is pushed way beyond the usual power level of Smash Ultimate. Like, sure, there are a lot of moves in this game that are pushed. A decent amount of characters in this game have at least 1 or 2 moves, where you just go, wow, I can't believe this move is real. Sometimes these moves are a little bit more blunt in how good they are, and other times they're a little bit more deceptive. These moves are usually attached to characters that are otherwise not very impressive, and have just regular movesets generally speaking. You can get away with characters having more splashy, strong moves, as long as the character is rounded out in other places. Moves like Diddy Kong's Banana, Zero Suit Down B, Bayonetta's Up B, and Side B are likely some of the best specials in the game, and would be quite absurd on most other characters if you just gave it to them without compensating for it. However, these characters pay the price for having these moves in more subtle ways, having been consciously designed with the greater character in mind. It's just basic balancing. Something I felt Ultimate had a good grasp on until it nosedived around Fighters Pass 2. You should make characters that have peaks and valleys in terms of their moveset. That's what gives each character their own sense of identity. What I mean is, they're usually held back by the greater design of the character. Steve is not really one of these characters, and Minecart is one of my less favorite move designs. Minecart is a moving special slash projectile that uses 1 iron. Steve will enter the minecart and start riding it forwards. Should you hit anyone along the ride, they will be launched. If you have gold and redstone, you can do an even more powerful version of the minecart that goes faster. So far, so good. If this was all the move did, I really think it would have been fine, but of course, as you probably know, it doesn't quite end here. Steve can jump out of the minecart, and it will keep going forwards, at which point it can actually grab people, and they will be trapped inside the minecart, even if they shield the attack. This is what makes the move so good, and it should not be hard to see why. I really can't believe nobody objected to a projectile command grab while playtesting. It seems like one of those unwritten rules of design that they kind of just shouldn't break. There are a decent amount of command grabs in this game, as in moves that also ignore shields. Usually they're specials, which means you can use them in the air, making them a good mix-up on shields. attacks. There are also moves in the game that can be either a normal attack or a command grab, like Monkey Flip, and that move is already really good. However, in that case you have to commit to one or the other. It has the ability to be either, but you have to choose before you use it. Having both in one at the same time like this really makes a world of difference. I really don't even know where to start with this move. It really encapsulates the problem I have with a lot of Fighters Pass 2. Most of the characters have the feel that they only really exist to see how far they can push a character concept's boundary. Just how much range can we get away with? What if we make an FGC character with an even more rudimentary game plan? What if we make a character that's just a little bit better at everything than most characters? All of these characters push the limits in many ways across many moves. But despite how many missteps I feel they made with these characters, I still feel they fall just within the admittedly fairly arbitrary line in my head of what should be accepted as a move in Smash. Steve's Minecart, however, does overstep this line in my opinion. We kinda see the same justification as with a lot of his moves, where since it requires a resource to use, that warrants making the move way stronger than it would be otherwise. The cost of one measly iron feels like nothing compared to how good the move is, especially when you keep in mind that Steve is inherently rewarded for mining in the first place. To really put it into perspective, they felt the need to keep a lid on Banjo's Wondering, a move that does not even come close to being as good as Minecart. Yet Minecart just needs a little bit of heavily encouraged camping to get as many uses as you can mine. It really goes to show how far the pendulum has swung in terms of power, just from one fighter's pass to the other. The scale of balance is all out of whack here. Anyways, enough theoretical doom and gloom about how broken this move is. I feel the best way to show that is just to dive into the details. The main issue with this move really is that simply having a projectile command grab is really good. Generally projectiles get to be safer because of how shields deal with them well. There are of course other ways to dodge them as well, but shields are usually the most consistent way. Projectiles usually have a lot of end lag afterwards, which makes them still safe because of the range, but you will likely be able to close the distance if you can shield the projectile. Steve completely ignores this, not just because you can't shield the move, but also because he has very little end lag after using the move, being able to jump out and act very quickly. This can make the move pretty hard to deal with, but the big part is how it's practically impossible to punish Steve for using it, unless he uses it very close to you. Again, if this was all the move was, it would just be very strong, but as I mentioned, the move initially has a normal hitbox as well, and is active for as long as he stays in the cart. This creates a very strange scenario where you often have to guess if Steve is going to jump out of the cart or not, as if you prepare to shield the initial hit, he may just jump out before that and catch you with the grab part of the move. The most messed up scenario that can happen, however, is the case where you shield the first hit, and then while you're in shield stun, Steve jumps out, and if you don't roll away immediately, the minecart will still grab you, since it's now a command grab. Of course, if you roll away, you also get hit by the minecart, so that's not happening. And if you roll in or spot dodge, you'll end up right in Steve's face, eating a backer or an anvil. It's a very tricky spot to be placed in, where you have to be very quick to read what Steve is going to be doing next, or face the consequences. Initially when Steve uses this move, it has armor, and not just one kind. It has like 3 different properties, all of which are kinda weird. First off, the minecart itself has 8.4% of health, meaning a move that deals more damage than that will destroy it. Steve has 60 units of knockback armor, which is pretty obtuse if you don't know how it works, but basically it means that weaker moves that don't launch you too far will be armored and will not knock him out on the minecart. For moves like projectiles, it can actually be quite annoying, since the minecart will absorb the hit and just drop Steve out with a little lag afterwards. However, there are a lot of other moves that will also miss Steve and only hit the minecart depending on the spacing. This is all well and good, but probably the most egregious and unnecessary part of this move is how the minecart actually has a property where it cannot be damaged at all during the first 17 frames after using the move. This will cause the move to quite literally ignore attacks, like up-close short-range moves, as well as projectiles that would otherwise obliterate it. Steve himself can still be hit during this part, and the knockback armor does not actually trigger until Steve is in the minecart. But it's just a very silly little extra thing that might come up sometimes, and when it does come up, it just feels very annoying. It just seems so wrong in some cases, but that's how it works. When you actually look at the hurt box of the minecart, as in the part of the move that detects incoming attacks, both Steve and minecart have some pretty funny stuff going on. For starters, they very intentionally gave Steve really stubby legs during this animation while he is in the minecart, specifically so the minecart protects him more than it would at first glance. Secondly, the hurt box for minecart is actually a lot bigger than you would think, and covers Steve up to about his head, meaning that certain moves that don't hit too high will have a much harder time hitting, since the card will absorb the hit instead. Basically, the card acts like a shield for Steve a lot of the time, if they clash with other attacks. When Steve is in the minecart, the hitbox is actually surprisingly small, having a bit of a negative disjoint, though this is not exactly unusual for moving specials, since they move fast and cover a lot of distance anyways. Just a bit unusual for Steve to actually follow the usual design rules. The damage the move does is technically based on how fast Steve is moving, but a majority of the time it'll just be either the redstone boosted version or the regular speed version, but it can deal less damage if you're feeling a little silly. The boosted version is actually crazy strong, like it KOs from across the stage at really early percentages, and closer to the blast zone it's just disgusting. The normal version is a lot less oppressive, but can still pack a serious punch given the right conditions. When Steve does jump out of the cart, that's when the fun begins. For the first 5 frames, it actually can't grab you, which was a nice attempt to prevent what I mentioned earlier from happening, but that still does happen, so better luck next time, I guess. After that, we have a bunch of hitboxes where the purple hitbox grabs you, and the other ones only hit you if you're in the air, where you luckily cannot be grabbed. Also, when you're laying on the ground after a missed tech, you're not able to be grabbed, which sometimes could actually make not taking a real option, since getting grabbed is so much worse than just getting launched. It's a bit weird to me that they chose to model the hitboxes on the side so perfectly, when Ultimate is notorious for having projectiles with hitboxes that are smaller than their actual visuals. Like a cool axe you got going here. Really fits the axe and all. Should you get grabbed by the minecart, it will carry you along until you can escape it. Which brings me to my favorite mechanic in all of Smash, mashing. Just like with normal grabs, if you mash buttons on the controller, or rotate the stick while trapped in the minecart, you will escape faster. I'll save you the whole rant this time, but I'm really not a fan of mashing as a mechanic in Smash. Encouraging you to basically destroy your hand and controller to get out of a move faster is not good, in my opinion. Kinda thought they learned this lesson back in the day with the whole Mario Party fiasco, where they had to give out gloves to people who were hurting their hands playing minigames. I assume they thought people would just be mashing a little bit, but the ceiling for how much you can mash is really high. If you mash really fast, you can get out of some moves like this very quickly, and if you don't at all, your opponent has so much time to punish you for it. I just don't like that the line between surviving an interaction like this or not can often come down to something that is, in my opinion, not very interesting, fun, or very indicative of how the rest of the game is played. It's fine for normal grabs specifically, because the only thing you actually risk by not mashing like crazy is taking a little extra damage from a pummel. You don't stand a lot to lose if you don't mash, so you can just kinda choose not to if you're like me and don't really like doing it. However, for moves like minecart, you can sometimes lose your stock way earlier if you get hit by a speedy minecart at the wrong time, or can't mash out before Steve catches up to the cart. This is not something exclusive to minecart, of course. Lots of other characters in this game have similar things, but minecart is yet another culprit in this character-wide crime. I wish it didn't work like this, but that's how it is. Escaping the minecart does not give you control over your character until a staggering 30 frames after mashing out. In addition, it just kinda pops you up into the air in perfect range of up smash or any follow-up really. Make it so that hitting a minecart on stage is an almost guaranteed follow-up with a really strong smash tech, given that Steve keeps moving in the same direction, which is rarely an issue. This is somehow the better of two evils, the alternative being you falling off stage, which results in a very easy follow-up. For there, for some reason, is a spike. We'll talk about it more later, but this results in one of the meanest combos in the entire game. If you are at high percent, then it doesn't even really matter which one you get hit by, since the time you're trapped in the cart is proportional to the damage you've taken, so you can kinda just pick your poison in those cases. There are some rare cases if you get hit by a boosted minecart, and you get pushed off stage where you still might be able to make it back. It still puts you in a terrible position, but at least you have a shot at surviving there. So the minecart can actually only grab you when it's moving at a certain speed. When it slows down, it actually can't grab you anymore, even if you run into it. This makes for a bit of unclear gameplay in my opinion, since you can never really know exactly when the minecart is just slow enough to not grab anymore. I wish there was like an indicator, or that the cart simply despawned sooner. I've had some absolutely absurd cases like this, where the cart was actually pushed by the body blocking to the point where it gained enough speed to grab again. Turns out that minecart is also a boomerang projectile after all. It really is the lethality of minecart that makes this move so good. Once you're in the cart on Steve's wild ride, you basically have no choice but to accept your fate. With how safe and riskless the move is, for it to have this high of a payoff, it makes the move just so desirable to hit. And that's why Steve players will be throwing this move out a lot if they have the opportunity. The fact that it may cost them a single iron is nothing in the face of getting a really early KO, or an easy way to clean out a long stock. Not to mention that it interacts well with blocks, being good at scaring off people getting too close. Now, in all fairness, you will likely not get grabbed by the cart in a majority of cases. Once you learn to stop trying to shield Steve coming at you like a bullet train, you'll find that jumping will often solve your problems if you have some distance between you and Steve. However, this is something we in the biz call conditioning, and it's secretly the third thing that makes this move so good. If you jump a lot to dodge minecart, that's something that Steve players can pick up on very quickly. And now that safe jump option may be a first class ticket to the blast zone, seeing how once again Steve can act very quickly out of the minecart to cover that jump. It's not just all the very oppressive aspects of this move that makes it so good, not just the much needed movement it allows for, but also the massive amount of conditioning the move applies to neutral. Having a projectile that you can't shield forces people into the air. Even if most of the time you don't capitalize on that, having a move that forces your opponent to play jump rope at your demand is endlessly better than a move that can simply be shielded safely. The cart is definitely worth its weight in gold. Or iron, I suppose. Before we move on, there's a few miscellaneous things I would like to go over. After jumping out of the cart, you can actually jump back into it and keep driving it. It can probably throw an opponent off if they've never seen it before. Even if the minecart has totally stopped, you can still do this, as long as you do it before it despawns. The redstone powered tracks Steve places down are not actually just for show. If the minecart bounces back into the tracks with the torches, it will actually get another boost independent of the first one, which I'm sure you can mess up some people with. If you place a block on top of the minecart like this and just re-enter it, you can just kind of get into the wall, which is a little silly. Blocks plus minecart really just result in a bunch of unpredictable interactions. It's mostly fine as long as you just keep your distance from it, but there really is a ton of weird little interactions like this, which honestly are kind of fun to look at. Minecart is a very messed up move, and likely one of the most feel-bad moves to get hit by. It just sucks seeing you get wheeled away knowing the up smash or forward air is imminent. I think doing a projectile command grab is one of those things you just shouldn't do in Smash. Design-wise, they just kind of flew too close to the sun here in my opinion. If it just launched you and maybe did a bit of damage, that would really be so much better. And even if they do insist on it being a command grab, they really should let you act faster after escaping, making it so that Steve at least kinda have to predict what you do when you escape from it, instead of just getting to wait and react every time. There's a lot of good ways I think this character could be fixed, but that's for another time I suppose. There's a lot more to be said, so we kind of have to move on. When tournaments started happening again in late 2021, Steve would remain a fairly unpopular character. He would show up in top 64 and sometimes top 16 placings at majors, largely at the hands of two Steve players, Jake and Yanni, who would be by far the most prevalent players of the character during this time. Despite these showings, Steve never made any huge placings. However, people were kinda catching on to how ridiculous this character was, finally being able to see all the theoretical things the character was able to do in a real tournament. It would not be until February of 2022 before any Steves actually made it into top 8 at a major. At Glitch Infinite, a fairly lower stack tournament, but a major nonetheless, Jake was able to get 3rd, beating quite a few notable players in the process there. At the time, the pot was already kinda stirring with regards to Steve being maybe a little bit better than people thought, and this was the first big data point in that direction. Despite this showing, no other Steve would get a top 8 placing in the following 3 months. And because of this, everyone thought it was basically back to familiar times, and kinda seemed to forget about the character mostly. This would be until May, when a fairly unknown player named Akula would seemingly out of nowhere take his first major win, using the character to win Maizuma top 7, and would just a few days later take another major tournament, Kagaribi 7, once again using Steve, and Donkey Kong. Somehow. I have a feeling that maybe Steve did most of the heavy lifting there. I probably can't keep going without shedding a little bit of light on Akula himself, as he is essentially the person who brought out the real potential of this character. He picked up Smash during the huge tournament route, meaning while he was fairly known in Japan at the time, he was quite under the radar when it comes to overseas Smash players. Which is what made this sudden win at these 2 tournaments, with a character that was suspected to be really good, into such a huge thing. Now, of course, at the time this was viewed as a bit of an anomaly, because, I mean, it kinda was. It seemed so out of nowhere, and that this must just be a 1 or 2 time thing in this case. There was of course also a lot of dissonance with all of this happening in Japan. A lot of overseas Smash players had a tenuous view of how Smash worked there, seeing how people from Japan didn't usually travel to big tournaments at the time, and overseas players would rarely travel to Japan either, which caused some people to be a bit dismissive of tournament results happening there, and not viewing a Japanese major win the same way they would view an American one. While this is likely out of ignorance more than malice, it has been remedied a lot in recent times. But at the time, nobody really wanted to consider that any of this meant anything. That Akula might just be a really good player, and Steve a very good character. They wouldn't believe it until they saw it themselves. And luckily for Akula, he was going to get that chance very soon. While Minecart is definitely the worst offender, Anvil does give it a good run for its money, being another projectile that uses iron, and since it does, it's another fairly pushed move. Steve spawns an Anvil below him, and can either ride it while it falls, or let it fall by itself. Unlike Minecart and blocks, I don't really think there's a huge fundamental design issue here, and really I think that's the case for a majority of Steve's moves. There already exist similar moves like Hydrant, which is perfectly fine, and haven't caused much problems. No, the main issue here, and this might sound a little silly, but the move is actually just too strong. Like, it hits too hard. Like, the numbers are just too high. Anvil's KO threshold is a huge mess. The move just straight up KOs too early. It feels just so off to get hit by this move at 80 or 90% and have your entire stock just explode out of nowhere for simply trying to hit Steve when he's in the air. I'm sure you've had this move hit you before, and have it just KO you way before you would expect it. The knockback on this move genuinely feels unnatural. It's the same feeling as picking up a carton of milk you thought was empty, only to realize it was full. The same feeling of walking upstairs while not really looking, and thinking there's an extra step when there's not. I feel a little jolt of surprise every time it happens, and if you don't feel the same way, I suppose that's fair. That's what having played this game and the game before it for an ungodly amount of hours will do to you. The move doesn't come out until frame 20, so it's not exactly that fast, but given that it has a ton of range being a falling projectile and all, You can use it very safely when you're launched into the air. Like I said, Steve has the choice to ride the Anvil down, which makes it a lot stronger. This is the version of the move that is just going to disintegrate stocks on contact. It deals a massive 18% damage, and has an astounding amount of knockback behind it. Riding the Anvil down like this technically makes you a little bit more vulnerable than it would be otherwise. However, when you look at the hitbox, saying Steve is exposed here when he has this massive hitbox under him is like saying Rob is not top 5 in the game, simply untrue. Should you jump off, the move is a little bit weaker, and the Anvil will drop by itself. Don't think it's any less dangerous though, because it still really does a number on you if you get hit by it. Steve once again can very quickly disengage from the strong version, meaning you still kind of have to guess which one he's gonna go for. When you just let the Anvil drop, it is admittedly a lot weaker, dealing 10% instead of 18 when Steve's not riding it, though it still serves as a huge deterrent nonetheless. Should the Anvil land and then refall again, then it will actually be even weaker, which can happen if you place it on a block or something. Granted, this is not that big of a deal, but can be a vital part of a nasty ledge trap setup. The hitbox is the same across the two versions, being just about the size of the Anvil visual, which is absolutely massive in other words, being a huge disjoint that you don't really want to be anywhere near. Additionally, when the Anvil lands, there is another hitbox, really just adding a whole bunch more beef to the whole thing. It can be really scary to shield against the Anvil because of this, seeing how the landing hit can cause a lot of extra stun, which Steve can actually capitalize on. Even parrying the last hit leaves you quite vulnerable. Since it deals so much damage, it's able to beat out a lot of aerials trying to hit Steve, if you can even reach him at all behind the massive Anvil. Challenging this move at any point is a huge fool's errand, and will more likely than not end up with you cancelling the Anvil hit at best, and at worst it'll send you to an early grave, unless Steve rides the Anvil all the way down, and you shield the final hit. Actually trying to hit Steve at any point is just a bad idea. You're way better off trying to avoid the move altogether, seeing how every Steve in the universe will be using this move when you have them pressured in the air, because the risk versus reward is just that skewed. The risk being having to dig for one more iron to use, and the reward being a huge projectile that KOs as early as most heavyweight smash attacks. The move also has a ton of really strange interactions. As you can imagine, given the fact that the move is a weird falling physics move, the move is actually a little bit bugged. If you minecart off the Anvil after you've used it, it will remain the strong version even if Steve is not on it, which is very strange, and I haven't really seen a lot of people ever bring this up. Just makes it a lot more scary if you can set up a ledge trap using both minecart and Anvil somehow. Steve can do footstool to Anvil as a punish when up close. A lot of characters in this game have up-close footstool punishes, where you quickly jump on their head after they use an attack, something that will stun them for a bit and give you time to throw out a move afterwards. Most characters don't get too much out of this, since the move has to be directly below the character in some way, but this works out perfectly for Anvil, since it does just that. This effectively lets you punish attacks with a move that is way too slow to do so otherwise. It actually really rounds up Steve's up-close punish game nicely, making him able to punish moves that otherwise would be way too quick. The fact that you can follow up with an Anvil is pretty absurd though. Like, this thing will take stocks at like 80% just for shielding otherwise safe hits. So this move has been all nice and fun so far, but we gotta talk about bones. Quick question, do you know which way Anvil launches you when you get hit by it? As you can see here, it can launch you either way, but what actually determines the way it sends you? Well, it's bones. The top bone, to be specific. The top bone is a property tied to your hurt box, and basically determines what is considered to be the left side of your character or the right side. It's essentially a line going through your body. You see, Anvil doesn't launch in any specific direction. Instead, it checks which side of the top bone it collided with, and launches you the other way. So if you get hit on the left side of the top bone, it launches right, and vice versa. This seems pretty simple, right? Basically, if you think the Anvil is going to land on the right side of you, and launch you left, you DI down and to the left to survive longer. Wrong. You see, the move actually launched you to the right instead. And now that good DI is actually awful DI, causing you to lose your stock even earlier. This is because your top bone does not always move around with your character, meaning what the game considers to be the left side or the right side of your character does not always match what would make logical sense. There are a few moves in this game that have the character lean almost all the way back behind the top bone, meaning in some cases like this, the character is always considered to be on the left side of the Anvil, almost regardless of where it hits. As I mentioned, this is particularly unfortunate, since DIing the move correctly can make you live way longer, and DIing it wrong is very detrimental. These are basically all case by case, and there's no consistent logic to how the top bone moves, or does not move during certain attacks. A lot of the time your assumptions will probably be correct, since it stays generally in the center of your character during most animations, but be aware that there are outliers. If your character leans forwards a lot, or shifts their body a lot during the animation, there's always a chance the top bone does not move as much as you would imagine. The same thing applies to getting hit by Anvil in the air. You still want to try to DI down and in the direction it launches you. However, due to the slacker angle of the aerial version, if you don't really know which way it's going to launch you, DIing straight down will be much better than no DI or DIing the wrong way, since down DI accounts for both directions equally. It is very silly that this move works like this, or more silly that the top bone is out here living its own life sometimes, but now you are aware of it at least, so get testing if you find any strange interactions with it. As you can imagine, this has some ramifications for the footstool to Anvil punish I just talked about, but in this case it's actually to our benefit for once. You see, when you footstool someone, it actually puts you in the exact same spot above the character every time. I think it literally puts you directly on top of the top bone actually, since auto turnaround characters will turn around if you move just a tiny bit after footstooling them. This means that you can predict exactly which way the Anvil will launch you just by testing it out, since after a footstool like this, Steve will always be in the exact same spot above you. The way Steve faces does not influence this in any way as far as I could tell. It's all dependent on which way you are facing at the time of the footstool. So if this ever happens to you, you have no excuse not to DI it perfectly every time. However, there are two exceptions, that being DK and Sonic. These characters actually get launched either way depending on the timing of when Steve uses down air, but only when they're facing to the left. Move over, buffed left facing Cloud, nerfed left facing Sonic is in town. If you mash down air as fast as you can, Sonic will be launched to the right instead of the usual left, meaning you basically have a 50-50 on him, where you can delay the Anvil by a few frames, and it will then launch into the left instead of right. You would imagine this is because the top bone moves around during the footstool animation, but no, it actually stays in place entirely, so I honestly don't know why it happens, and why it seemingly only happens on these two characters, and only while they're facing left. There could be more characters like this. I didn't do extensive testing to be fair, but these two just jumped out very quickly. If you have any idea, leave a comment about it, and if we can get to the bottom of this, I'll pin the comment or something. I do find it very funny though, that I was able to find some anti-Sonic tech, only for it to be exclusive to Steve. Like, if that's not a monkey paw moment, I don't know what is. Anvil also has some really strange properties when used on the ground. The move pushes Steve up a bit, and then makes him fall back to the ground. Should anyone be close when he does this, for example after landing an attack on shield, you will actually be put on top of the Anvil as well, where it will hit you and cause a guaranteed shield poke, even if you manage to shield in time, which Steve can then follow up on. This is of course very silly stuff. Just landing on top of the Anvil at any point while it's falling will also cause the same thing to happen, but it just seems so jarring to see someone get taken off the ground like this, onto the Anvil, and then have it just hit them regardless. It probably doesn't happen very often, but it's just so weird when I do see it. Like, I really feel like it shouldn't work like that. But with all the facts on the table here, I don't really think there's too much debate on whether or not this move is a little too good. It's a fine move in concept, just once again very pushed power-wise, which is truly the biggest sin the move has ever committed. It might feel like such a minor offense compared to the more complicated transgressions of Minecart and blocks, but believe me, when you're on the tasting end of the soup that is Steve's gameplay, Anvil's flavor is going to make itself known. For starters, it's basically another unpunishable projectile. This results in almost a free way to get back down on stage, since actually interacting with the Anvil is always going to be a lopsided proposition, meaning you basically have to respect it and be very careful in how you pressure Steve when he's in the air, which is a bit of an issue when by far Steve's biggest downside is that he moves slowly and otherwise would be really exploitable in the air. However, with the combination of Anvil, Minecart, and blocks, Steve is more than capable of scrapping with you, even if he technically is in disadvantage. Seeing how the risk versus reward of trying to interact with any of these moves is simply not worth it unless you really know what you're doing. As a result of this, Steve is able to effectively get back on stage, when a lot of other characters with similar movement would have a much harder time, being able to undermine one of the character's weaker aspects. If these moves were a little bit more toned down, and you actually had a chance to interact with these moves without having to risk being severely hurt for it, I think there would be a lot less problems surrounding this character. I will say, however, and this goes for both Anvil and Minecart really, when Steve does run out of iron, he really is very vulnerable. Without his two panic options, you can really see how unimpressive Steve's movement really is, having no choice but to slowly fall down or retreat to ledge. Even on stage he will not have Minecart, so you can pretty safely corner him then, at which point he probably won't be able to mine for more. If you can keep up the pressure in a situation like this, playing Steve can feel almost helpless in a way. Getting Steve into this position can be pretty tricky however, and will take a lot of careful play avoiding all the moves that spend iron. Most Steve players will also likely not want to spend their last iron they have, and will likely hold on to it as a deterrent more than anything else. The difference between having a single iron and not having any iron is actually huge, since even if you just have just one, you still have to respect it. This is one of the cooler, more dynamic aspects of the character that I really wish shined through a bit more. On June 16th to 19th, the Gimvitational was taking place, an invitational tournament hosted by the namesake himself. Despite having very few players attending, invitationals are usually considered majors, because of the high skill level usually present. This invitational used a voting crowdfunding style for choosing the players. However, also importantly was the fact that the two winners of Kagaribi 7 were also personally invited, those two being Asimo and Akala. Around the time leading up to this tournament, there had been a pretty major upshift in people's perception of Steve as a character. The prospect of him being good was now really on the table, likely spurred on by Akala's recent major wins. and the occasional regional and local win the character picked up in the months afterwards. We all pretty much knew what the character was capable of at this point, and all the crazy tech and absurd moves the character had to offer. The blood was already in the water, and the only thing the character needed was cold hard results. This would be the first time this breakout Steve player would have the chance to go up against all the highly ranked overseas players. It was time for Oculus to prove his mettle, and watch for this character's viability. And the result? Well, I think you can guess where this is going.
It continues. It continues, guys!
55!
It continues!
55!
Final D, no platforms around you, but you gotta get that one hit, and it just felt like...
I'm just building rage.
Strategic rage, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, he dropped the Anvil
And
on
that's
him, man.
He's
Oh!
gonna ride through.
There he is! Don't go near it,
read
he's gonna ride through!
Best shields, yeah, exactly. Yep, there's the back here. That's the game.
Honestly? Oh, is this gonna be it?
Oh, it is.
Above him, the wall. Oh, wait. Got some tricks.
Yeah,
the
that'll
up
be it, man.
smash.
This would be the first taste of the sheer dominance this character is capable of. Oculus would go on to demolish the competition, not dropping a single set in the entire tournament. Now having taken major tournaments in the two biggest match regions, there was basically no more doubt regarding both Oculus' ability or Steve's potential. This was more or less the final nail in the coffin for Steve down players. Turns out this character was good. Like, really good. In the following months there would be a massive flood of Steve discourse, and the first idea of even banning this character would begin to arise. This was not exclusively because of this tournament. It had been going on for a while, but it really was an eye-opening event for a lot of people who have perhaps not seen Steve been brought to this level before. Here we got to see front and center what this character is capable of, and it was not pretty. A cold and optimized Steve, well aware of the quite overpowered aspects of the character, a willingness to camp and nickel and dime every interaction for as many resources as possible, which would go on to define how this character is optimally played. Something that kinda came as a contrast to the, and I mean no shade by this, more freestyle type of gameplay we'd seen up to this point. Still, it's a fairly small data point in the grand scheme of things. The players may just not have been very acclimated to playing against Steve, and a lack of matchup knowledge as well. Wrapping your head around this character is not an easy task, and especially when you have to fight against that character. Being an invitational, there was a large amount of top players missing. Concluding this character is broken over just one showing like this is obviously a little hasty. We were just halfway through the year, and there were many tournaments left to go, many of which Oculus would attend. While Steve may have taken this one, nobody was gonna let him take the rest for free. Little did we know that a new age was beginning. Not to sound like a broken record here, but I really can't believe they thought Steve's up tilt was okay. It doubles as both an up tilt and an up air. They are practically the same move. So what's the big deal with the move then? Well, it's a really fast up tilt coming on in frame 6, and frame 4 if you have golden tools. This is very fast for a move that only has 7 frames of lag afterwards. It's actually pretty absurd how fast you can spam this move. And they knew you'd be doing that too, since they let you just hold down the button to keep using it. The hitbox on this move is just absurdly big, like way bigger than it has any right to be. It covers both sides of Steve during the attack, and lasts for a staggering 4 active frames, reaching far into the air in the process, making it not only a solid anti-air, but more like a anti-your whole existence. The frame data on this move is quite absurd, and it just gets stronger depending on the material. Had that been all the move was, I think it would have been pretty pushed, but relatively harmless nonetheless. Sure, it being able to combo into itself a few times is very strong, but other characters do kinda similar things already. But we're far from done here, because you can actually move while using this move, which throws a whole different dimension into the oppressiveness of this move. Usually in Smash when you have quick spammable moves, they're held back by the fact that they push you back. Even if it's just slightly, they will inevitably push you to the point where you can get away. So you can imagine that some problems arise when you're able to move and use a fast low lag move like this. You can't just hold shield and wait until you get pushed out, since Steve can kinda keep pushing up against you while attacking. And not every character is going to be able to punish this move even, since it's actually very safe on shield. A lot of characters that don't have really fast out of shield options will likely struggle to fight back directly, which I really don't feel should be the case, given how easy it is to put someone in this position, especially if you have golden tools in which the move is even faster actually. Now there are a few things to keep in mind. Steve's up tilt will stale when hitting your shield, a mechanic that makes moves weaker the more times you land them. This includes moves that hit shields, and it will happen fast since the move is so quick, meaning it's kinda worth it to shield a few hits before trying to escape. The later hits will have less shield stun, since they'll be weaker, though this hardly matters too much. The tool durability also decreases as well, so the more your shield eats the better. Sadly, when it comes to diamond up tilt, a majority of the time it's going to almost destroy your shield in about 2 to 3 hits, since it deals a lot of damage, likely resulting in a shield poke if you don't get out of there by then. So it's not like any of this is that practical really. Best advice I can give you is just to stay away at all costs. There's very little to be gained by trying to challenge this move, since it has so little lag. Now, if I told you it was about to get worse, and not just like a little worse, but new world-ending levels of worse, could you believe that? Well, it doesn't really matter, cause It will. Let's talk about no impact landing, or NIL for short. Simply explained, it's a phenomenon where during certain animations, some characters are able to instantly snap to floors of a platform, or the ground for that matter, making them instantly able to use grounded moves. The exact specifics are a bit unnecessary to go into, and are also very case by case, to make an exact science out of. But just so you know vaguely what we're talking about here. I bring this up once again because blocks have arrived to stir up chaos. Steve is able to do a no impact land when placing down blocks. If you place a block in the air and jump at the same time, Steve is able to land on top of the block he just placed, making you able to elevate Steve into the air while still having access to his grounded moves. I think you can see where this is going. By using this, you are able to chain up tilts into each other, for as long as Steve is able to place blocks, and you can usually end it with an up smash for a stupidly early KO. If done properly, this can steal stocks at very early percentages, and all you need in theory is to land a single stray 6-frame up tilt with almost no end lag. You really can just be living your best life and get absolutely demolished by a sneaky up tilt at 20%. It's tragic to see every time. Obviously there are a few characters in this game that can do similar things, as in getting failed combos off of just a single move like this, them mainly being Luigi and Kazuya, who is actually even worse in those respects, preferring to take the stocks at 0 if they can get away with it, the absolute criminals. However, unlike those two, and I can't believe I'm actually going to have to defend Kazuya here, that is at least alone what makes those characters so busted. It's not like it's the fourth thing on a huge list of already absurd things the character can do. I don't really think characters being able to do things like this is particularly okay, or even very fun design in my opinion, but those characters at least have some other things holding them back, where Steve just kind of doesn't in my opinion. I wish no character in the game was consistently able to steal stocks out of nowhere like this. But here we are, that's the game. The execution of this combo, however, is admittedly a little tricky. It requires very precise timings and a lot of fast movements, and it's even recommended to use a special control setup as well. It will take some trying to get to the point where you can do it consistently, however it's not so hard it's unrealistic. It's been done many times in casual and tournament settings alike, and it's one of those things you can just practice to get better at it. It's not like it's some rare DI and percentage-based combo off a weird hitbox that's impossible to land. It just takes some time and dedication for a huge payoff. You don't even have to do the whole thing a lot of the time. It's all relative to the percentage you're at. A lot of the time, just a single up tilt into up smash will take stocks way ahead of when they should. Obviously, I do believe this was an oversight, and not at all a thing Steve was supposed to be able to do. The whole move is basically balanced around the fact that Steve's jump height is very bad, and that he wouldn't be able to chain them together like this otherwise. While I can't really blame them directly for this, with the whole thing of Steve really only becoming a problem after the final patch, being dropped and such, I still have a lot of issues with how the move is in general. Like, what are you actually supposed to do in a situation like this? If you're a slower character with worse roll frame data, no other character really has anything like this where they just trap you in your shield. And the few characters that kinda have something similar have it as a part of a very specific and always counterable move. I guess their logic was that since the move is both an up tilt and an up air, then they have to make it as good as those two moves combined, which would also explain why Steve's jab is so good. Turns out you actually don't need an up tilt at all, when you can just use your grounded up tilts 3 blocks off the ground. If you have golden tools when you use it in the air, it's literally the fastest aerial move in the entire series duration-wise, which is just once again so indicative of how I feel they push so many boundaries with Fighters Pass 2, and not necessarily in a good way. Sometimes boundaries exist for a reason. Maybe a move should not be a projectile and a moving attack and a command grab. Maybe it's fine when the longest range in the game belonged to Byleth and Belmonts. Maybe it was fine not to have a command input move that has true combos out of it at any percent, and leads into an infinite combo. You can kind of feel this in every aspect of this character, the will to test the limits just a little bit farther. Like a mad scientist trying to see how far they can go before their experiments blow up. It's all just pushed a little more than you usually would. Up tilt might be a victim of Block's crimes, but he is far from innocent. Together they enable each other to become one of the most crazy things any character can do in this game. I don't really think I can understate the amount of destruction this combo is able to do, and the fact is that people will only get more and more consistent at this, as they start optimizing and practicing it. Guess it's not such a bad time to be playing Shulk after all. In the following year, Steve would make his name known, and a lot of people were not just now aware of how good Steve was, but a lot of people were starting to pick up the character as well. Not long after Oculus showing at the Gimvitational, another Steve player would be the second to ever take a major win with Steve, that being Onin, winning Gommel 2022, also not being a very known player before this. This would of course add more fuel to the fire, as now seemingly people were picking up this character and winning tournaments out of nowhere. But this tournament in particular was quite lacking in top players, so it wasn't really regarded as such a huge thing, the grand finals being Steve versus Ice Climbers, something very out of the ordinary at the time. Despite this, the conversation around this character would start to get a little spicy. A lot of people had some well-placed concerns about how this character would affect the meta of the game, and at worst, people feared it would be another Bayonetta situation, so Steve had many eyes on him going forwards into the next tournaments. Oculus' recent showings may have been the catalyst for Steve's huge rise, but what was about to happen is probably the event that shaped the new age of Smash's meta, that being SmashCon 2022. SmashCon 2022 was by far the biggest tournament of the year. It actually being up until this point the biggest Smash tournament for Ultimate ever, in terms of entrance. It had an astounding amount of top level talent present. Aquila was not attending however, so it seemed like the threat of Steve was calmed for the moment. The run back would have to wait for another time. However, reality is not often so simple, and in what seemed like an impossible feat, Steve was about to claim another tournament.
Is safe for the moment. Munate's gonna get hit by the minecart, and that is it. Oden pops up.
He will have that bracket, and not to say it won't be any easier, but he is gonna go ahead and take
That's it.
3-0. But we also have Go. Oh no, the back air is gonna take it.
There's so many things that Steve can do, so many tricks, including that one, his final greatest trick.
Meister's got a little momentum. He also does not have any resources for another Anvil.
Oh, this is nuts.
Oh! It's it. That's it. That's it. Onin. The streak continues.
Onin wins SmashCon 2022, and if the floodgates were open before this, the whole dam is now shattered. This was a pretty huge deal at the time. Not only was Onin a relatively unknown player, but another Steve had taken another tournament, and not just any tournament, the biggest tournament of the year, beating a lot of really good and highly ranked players to get there. Steve went from almost having no significant results to winning 3 majors. Now it was not really a matter of potential, and it was looking like Steve did live up to expectations. After this, both Aquila and Onin would show up in a bunch of top 8s in the remaining year, and many other Steve players would land somewhere in the top 64 range. Aquila specifically would take many more tournaments, and was quickly rising through the ranks, being in the running for one of the best players in the game at the time. But in addition to that, Steve was really starting to catch on as a character. His usage data was quickly rising, and there were a lot more Steves at mid-skill levels. Much like what usually happens when a character is a little too good, everybody wants a slice of that top-tier pie. The sudden uptick in Steve's popularity resulted in quite a few things. A lot more labbing and optimization would happen during this time. If you don't know, this character has a ton of techs and optimizations, many of which were not discovered yet, or were underutilized. A lot of these were not exactly useful, more funny than good really, but if there was ever a character that just feels like they have an endless amount of tech to unearth, it's Steve, which I suppose is kind of appropriate when I think about it. However, a lot of additional techs were found that helped the character out in small ways, some techs being found just some months ago of writing this. There's of course one big tech that really made things a little bit tricky when talking about this character, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. For the moment, let's just pretend it doesn't exist and move on. The community around playing this character naturally spiked. People now had a solid blueprint for how to play this character. They knew the character was good enough, and had seen them take down some of the best players in the world. All that mattered at this point was getting good at playing the character. You know, the actual being skilled at the game part. Steve, to be fair, does actually have a pretty steep learning curve. There's a lot you need to work on, not just in terms of tech, but also in terms of managing resources and stuff. So it's not like you can just pick up this character with no effort, but if you do spend the time learning the character, it'll be well worth it. A combination of the massive surge of new Steve players and the rise of 2 previously unknown threats led to a bit of a panic in the community. I remember seeing a lot of people worried that this character would be another Meta Knight or Bayonetta situation, which I suppose is warranted in some ways. It had the signs of it, but it was all things considered a little too early to tell. A grand finals between Aquila and Onin sometime later did not exactly help the Steve allegations. To many this felt like a dystopian idea of what Smash would look like if Steve kept showing up, and it being kinda similar to Bayonetta dittos in grand finals many years ago didn't exactly make people be more at ease. People were concerned, and a discussion around banning the character was slowly being taken a lot more seriously. At this point, Steve really was without a shadow of a doubt the best character in the game, and maybe even a bit of a problem for the community to figure out. There was of course still a lot to be learned about the character, lots of matchup experience to gain, and character knowledge to understand. Steve was here to stay, and he would only gain more popularity and infamy as time went by. The rest of Steve's moveset is, while not as outwardly powerful as previously discussed moves, are still very good in their own right, and we'll be taking a look at the rest of them now, but I obviously don't have as much to say about them as the previous moves. There's stuff to say here for sure, but a lot of these moves can just kinda be encapsulated by just one idea, which really is another one of the backbones of why this character is so good, that being the concept of diamonds and diamond tools, which leads us into crafting as a whole. Crafting allows you when at a crafting table to change your tools into the highest value resource you currently have. All the 5 different tools have different durability and damage multipliers. As you could expect, wood is the weakest, followed up by stone, then iron, and finally diamond being the strongest. Gold is the same strength as wood, however gold also makes your moves come out a little bit faster, so there's that to consider as well. Generally speaking, stone gives all moves that use the tools a 1.1 damage multiplier, iron gives a 1.2, and diamond has an absurd 1.35 times damage multiplier. We'll see to what extent diamond tools affect his moves in due time, don't worry. You have to be at a crafting table to be able to craft tools, which is not much of a drawback since you could just summon it to your position. Alternatively, it will just respawn after a few seconds if destroyed. If a tool breaks like a diamond pickaxe and you craft a new one of a lower tier, the other tools are not replaced. It always leaves the higher tier tools, Besides that, crafting is pretty simple. Diamond tools take a little bit longer to craft than the other ones, which all share at the same time. If you're a fast character, you can actually push Steve away from the table and cancel the craft, which is very funny, but don't get too comfortable doing it. Diamond tools are, how should I say this, like, just extremely overpowered. Like, it adds a 1.35 times damage multiplier to all of Steve's attack that use the tools, which is a massive increase over the next best thing, being 1.2 from iron tools. Like, we'll see, this causes some moves to become very disproportionately strong, kinda like in the case with Anvil earlier, since the knockback is not really compensated for the extra damage it now deals. I've already mentioned that there are a lot of characters that exist in varying states of strength. Sometimes characters are able to become more powerful for a short while, and some other characters get more options after a certain percentage is met. This is a very important balance to keep in line. These opportunities never come for free. Aura needs Lucario to be badly damaged to get those crazy early stocks. Mac has to get hurt a bunch to get KO Punch, and if he misses, it's not gonna end well for him. And both characters have other aspects that bring them down as well. Aura actually makes Lucario weaker before he gets to a certain damage threshold, so while it can be beneficial for you, it's also holding you back to a certain degree. There is always a condition that needs to be met or worked around, some price to be paid to get the reward. That's kind of what inherently keeps the balance of these characters in check. If these characters always had access to these tools, that would be pretty crazy, I think you would agree. But that's also what justifies the developers giving these characters these tools in the first place, which leads me to how diamonds are implemented in this game, and why I think it's not exactly great. As you probably know, Steve starts out with wooden tools. This is the baseline, and anything better in terms of quality adds a different damage multiplier on top of the base damage, gold being the only exception as I mentioned. On paper, this is a perfectly fine way to balance diamond tools. They are super powerful, but Steve needs to mine to find them, meaning he won't have access to them at the start of the stock, which seems fair, right? You got your little condition and reward game, so what's the problem? Well, let's look away from the fact that having to mine is not really a cost, as discussed earlier, which, I mean, does kind of defeat the purpose of it a little bit, but the huge thing I think that makes diamond tools as strong as they are is just the fact that you can carry diamonds from one stock to another. Imagine if other characters like Joker could do something like this. Once Arsene triggers, he has the opportunity to just hang on to it and use it whenever he wants. Maybe he's close to losing his stock, so he'll just save it for the next one. And he could somehow store several Arsenes. But no, it's something that not only needs to be worked up to during the match, but you also have to capitalize on it when it triggers. It creates a sense of urgency for both players. When you play against him, you want it to go away as soon as possible, while Joker wants to get as much out of it as he can. There's many ways to get rid of it. You can play passively and wait until the timer runs out, or you can be more aggressive and try to hurt Joker, so the meter depletes faster. Regardless of how it goes, Arsene is a very dynamic mechanic, largely because you don't have complete control over when it triggers. Steve, on the other hand, has complete control over diamonds, which leads to basically the same play pattern every time. Steve will try their best to get a diamond on the first stock, likely take too much damage to make it worth using then, but if you don't take too much damage, you make the tools then and there, and from there they will basically have guaranteed diamond tools on the next two stocks. And there's very little you can do about it, besides trying to stop Steve from mining in the first place, which is just the status quo anyways. Once he has them, it's basically just a permanent upgrade to the character, which again is basically a trait exclusive to Steve. No other character in this game can just become permanently better for doing a certain thing. It's always temporary. I guess you could argue that diamond tools do break, which is true of course. However, it does take a lot for that to happen. And if you manage to break them, you probably got some good value out of them anyways, or likely another diamond to replace it. It basically just comes back to the main issue with mining as a whole, but diamonds working the way they do just kind of exacerbates the issue. If it couldn't carry them over between stocks, I think the mechanic would be quite fair actually. Maybe you could do it so they appear a little bit earlier, but he would lose the ability to cruise 2 out of 3 stocks with almost guaranteed diamond tools. He probably wouldn't be able to get them until you had at least dealt a little bit damage to him, meaning he also would have less time to use them. There's probably tons of ways to fix this. But I guess the core of the issue really is just that diamond tools are a little too strong for how little effort it takes to get them. Going forwards, I'm going to be talking about the diamond versions of attacks mainly, because that's what Steve is going to be having most of the time realistically, and it's really where the moves start being problematic. Some of them are just really good on their own though, even without diamond, and no move is a better example of this than back air. Back air might seem on paper like one of his less outrageous moves, but I still think it's probably one of the most indicative moves of how strong Steve is as a character. It's just a classic, straight up, really strong move. No wacky projectiles, no funny block combos. No, this is just a really good move in the most basic way possible, worthy of a triple S rank. The move is safe, strong, and stupidly big. The move is admittedly a little strange in how it works. The hitbox looks like this, and as you can see, it's pretty huge. Steve swings his pickaxe behind him, and the move is actually weaker on the first 2 frames, and stronger on the last 3 ones. To start off, the move auto-cancels on short hop, meaning you can put out this massive attack with little risk of getting punished for it. Even if you just recklessly throw this around, it's only -6 on shield, which is very safe for a move that is this strong. However, the main issue here really is just how grossly overpowered the move is. And I mean that in the pure literal sense, like the move is just too juiced up. It's the problem with diamond tools that we'll see a lot more of as we go through these moves. Even on stage normally, the move just KOs way too early, and if you land it higher up close to the blast zones, it can just delete stocks way ahead of schedule. So remember when we talked about down air and how it can sometimes launch the other way than you would first think? Well, back air has that as well. You see, for some reason they decided that the two hitboxes on back air should launch at different angles. One that launches to the side and one that launches more upwards. This is very rare actually, since most single hit moves with several hitboxes only tend to launch a single direction. Kinda specifically to make things like this not happen. When you give a move two fairly different angles to launch at, without compensating for the damage, that causes some problems. I think the reason they did this is because they wanted to give back air a sour spot, but didn't want to make the move deal less damage, which is usually how they go about doing that 99% of the time. And on paper this does work. The sour spot angle makes you live longer in most circumstances, since it launches at a better angle for survival. Once again though, I don't think they accounted for the fact that people were going to be landing this move far up into the air. I think they banked on the fact that Steve has very bad jump height, and would likely never get that far into the air, unless he built a little tower for himself like a fair Minecrafter. If you get comboed into the air with up tilts like this, there's a fair chance that Steve can follow up with a back air, in which case, combined with the disproportionate knockback of diamond tools, you may get launched and KO'd off the top of the screen, if you get hit by the sour spot angle. This, once again, is avoidable by DI, if you know which hitbox you're getting hit by. Once again, we have the dichotomy where if you DI optimally, accounting for the sweet spot, you may get hit by the sour spot and suddenly that's now bad DI, and the other way around. I think it's a bit silly that this is a thing, but I don't really think it's a huge deal overall. If you just DI down, you'll be fine against the sour spot, and even though it's far from perfect DI against the sweet spot, it's still better than wrong DI or no DI. You kinda have to cut your losses in a situation like this, seeing how most of the time Steve is pretty close to you after doing a ladder like this, and will likely land the sour spot anyways. You're better off just DIing down to be safe. And if it still KOs you off the side, at least you avoided being the top clip on Twitter that day. It's another case of the numbers being pushed a little too hard, and we end up with a move that KOs quite disproportionately early in some cases. It combos very nicely with a lot of Steve's panic options as well, being the perfect move to throw out after a minecart or down air, covering a lot of area in the process. This is a good time to bring up another thing Steve has, that being short hop macros. If you input a back air or forward air while short hopping, you'll get a move that looks like a variation of jab, which is a quick sword swing in front of or behind Steve. This is yet another thing Steve just gets to have, and in these cases it actually helps him out a lot. These moves are really fast out of shield. They come out on frame 7, which is not really close to the fastest in the game. That honor goes to this monstrosity, but 7 is still really good. It's the same frame as Cloud's up B out of shield, so if you think that move is quick, these are just as fast. These little moves might seem innocent enough, but they're a lot better than you would think. For one, they actually give Steve a quick way to punish up close attacks on his shield. The hitboxes are not massive, but good enough to punish most attacks close by. Without these, pressuring Steve's shield would be a lot easier, which is probably why it would have been a good idea to not make him have this. They also happen to combo into forward air and back air at early percentages, and sometimes later if they DI incorrectly. This is a bit unnecessary to say the least. I mean, these moves are already excessive enough. It's not like it's a major aspect of the character, but I feel like Steve has enough going for him that maybe we could have cut these. I guess they felt bad that jab and up tilt ate up so many moves being combined like this, resulting in less unique moves overall, but they already compensated for that by making them really good moves, with you being able to move around and stuff while using them. I guess they thought it would not be quite enough, or maybe they thought that Steve would be too helpless if he didn't have any fast out of shield options. I mean, it kind of would make sense for Steve's out of shield game to be slow. For whatever reason they decided to add these moves. It's definitely just another layer of flossing on this already very excessive cake. Since we're already on the topic, I guess we should talk about forward air as well. This move is a lot like back air, being a pickaxe swing downwards. However, the most notable and infamous part of this move is the fact that there's a spike on the later part of this move. This enables a whole bunch of combos that the character has no business doing. You can basically extend any combo by doing a forward air, since the hit stun from the spike will keep them in place. And since it launches you directly down, you always have your opponent where you want them, which can lead to even more combos or maybe even another forward air. The way this move allows for combos like this is very strong. I don't really know if they intended for it to be as good as it is. I mean, surely they must have, right? Since down throw to forward air seems like the most intentionally set up combo of all time. Jab helps a lot in these combos as well, having just the perfect knockback to land a spiking part of the move. The whole combo usually won't end with you losing a stock, unless they manage to link an up tilt into it or something. But the amount of damage that even just a normal forward air does is so high when you have diamond tools. Outside of combos and strings, the move is pretty useful all around. It's fast and powerful. The hitbox not too half bad either. Oh yeah, and it's also the reason why if you get hit by Minecart and fall off stage, you're basically done for. These moves were basically designed for each other. The whole idea of putting a spike on a forward air like this was maybe not the best. Of course, there's a lot of moves that are spikes that are not down airs, but I usually feel like they're a little bit more careful when implementing them. Most of them don't lead to scenarios like this where you can do combos, for example. The move usually doesn't come up too much outside of these two situations though. Two situations which I might add come up quite often. Overall, the move really is fine, but it just happens to be a very critical part of C's combo game. and those combos can easily deal around 40 to 60% without much problem, and with very little counterplay, so it's definitely a very strong move in that sense. Steve's grab is a bit of a strange case in my eyes. In one way, having a slow, long-range grab makes the character not as good at dealing with shields as he would be otherwise, but in this game normal grab stocks are at an all-time low anyways, so it's not like he's missing out too much. If he had a normal grab, it would likely be one of those really slow ones like Belmont's or something, in which case having a long-range grab is basically always better. As it stands, I think he benefits a lot more from having a somewhat slower grab with more range, than one with bad range and pretty mediocre lag. If you compare the move to some of these slower grabs in the game, it really isn't even that much slower. It only has like a little bit more end lag afterwards. So I think the grab is actually really solid given the circumstances. His throws are all really messed up as well. His down throw, despite actually needing an iron to use, deals a massive 18% damage and leads directly into the combo I was talking about earlier, involving forward air and jab and stuff. Again, the mentality that as long as it costs just one iron, I guess we can just make any move be totally absurd seems to be alive and well. Back and forward throw are fairly unremarkable. Back throw can be used to stage spike opponents, if you place a block in this specific spot and land a grab. Forward throw launches at a very sharp angle, which can give some characters a hard time recovering, but it shouldn't make too huge of a difference. Up throw, regrettably, is pretty strong. You can KO with it at around 130 to 160%, depending on weight and rage, which might not sound too impressive, but having a throw that KOs at all is a very underrated privilege that not every character has, especially seeing how it's an up throw and therefore does not care about stage positioning either. You'd be surprised by how nice it is to just be able to land a grab and press a single button to close out a stock, especially when you can do it at the same percent regardless of positioning. It keeps the opponents from just comfortably staying in shield when they're scared. All in all, his grabs and throws are really solid. Steve's jab functions pretty much like Mega Man's, in the sense that it doubles, or shall I say triples, as a jab, forward tilt and neutral air. The move may seem really mundane at first glance, and by most accounts it is. It's a simple sword swing in front of Steve, however it's quite fast, and seeing how you can actually move while using it, it ends up having a lot of utility much like up tilt does. It's fairly good just on its own, being fast and relatively safe since you can retreat while using it. However, it really shines as a combo extender. Like I mentioned, a single jab can often lead into a forward air which spikes them down, which again can be followed up with another move. It can even combo into forward smash for some really dangerous combos. It's the glue that keeps the horizontal combo game together. So while it's not the most impressive thing just on the face of it, its utility should not be underestimated. There's also the matter of how the move interacts with fast fallers and characters with high gravity. You've probably seen clips like this before, where Steve just carries an opponent across the whole stage using jab, which of course is very silly. Since the move doesn't put the character into tumble until higher percentages, this can very easily happen on characters that are not very floaty. You can of course have this happen to you to some extent if you're not a fast faller, but in those cases escaping is a lot easier, as long as you don't just put down the controller. I do find it a little ironic that this works especially good on Fox, seeing how back in Smash 4 he had a very similar thing going on with his jab, although that was patched out at some point. Jab is a really good move. Having a quick move that is as fast as jab, and has way more reach than the average one, really helps Steve with his otherwise slow out of shield game, if the macros didn't do a good enough job of that already. Elytra is Steve's up B, and you may be asking, what could possibly be wrong with such a seemingly simple recovery move? And I mean, not too much. If by not too much I mean everything. Okay, in all fairness, this move is not really problematic in any way inherently. However, when up against all the other amazing tools Steve has, it feels like such a huge overindulgence. It's an extremely good recovery move. It brings back the gliding mechanic from Brawl, and just like they did back then, they managed to stick it on one of the strongest characters in the game. It's almost like having a gliding recovery is actually really good, and makes the character better, or something. The move is probably one of the best recoveries in the entire game, and while it might lack some on-stage utility, in the way some other recoveries do, even though it somehow managed to still have some of that, it still exists as one of the cleanest recovery moves in the game, being very flexible and hard to intercept. Usually in Smash when they design characters that are slow in the air, their recoveries tend to reflect that. Either they don't go too far, or they're kind of inherently held back by the fact that the character's bad airspeed will not really get them into a good position after they get launched too far. As mentioned, Steve is very slow in the air, so you would imagine that they made a recovery that would reflect that. But nope. Elytra is basically tailor-made to once again undermine one of Steve's weaknesses, giving him a huge amount of freedom in how he wants to recover. Seeing how it has the gliding mechanic, it can be very hard to catch Steve when he's recovering, since he has a ton of different ways he can mix up his recovery. The move does have a hitbox, but it's so small to the point where you're likely not going to get hit by it. Despite the hitbox being small, it can still be very hard to actually hit Steve. This is because of Steve's hurtbox shifting to be a lot more horizontal. A hurtbox that, if I can take a second to talk about it, is also a very generous aspect of the character. Many characters in this game have huge, bulky hurtboxes that are much bigger than their actual bodies. Steve's body being composed of squares, and hurtboxes being made up of circles, meant that they went with the same route as they did with blocks, and made the circles a little bit smaller than the blocks making up his body, resulting in him having a smaller than usual hurtbox, or at least one that's a lot more compact than other characters. Like, just look at Richter here and his phantom forehead sticking out of his shield and stuff. Steve definitely doesn't have to worry about things like that. This is not a big deal or anything, but yet another favor that's bent to Steve's will. It makes him very hard to hit, and even then he can easily just fly or delay the recovery either after using it or before. A majority of recoveries in this game don't get to have the luxury of being this flexible. A lot of characters have to recover when you have the chance to make it back. Most recoveries like this are static and have a very fixed pattern after you use them. On some moves, you might be able to influence the angle of the recovery a little bit, which can be useful of course, while some just fly straight up into the air, with maybe some minor drifts to the side. Almost universally, you want to grab the ledge from below. This is generally the safest. However, if you want to do that, seeing how a lot of recoveries are very fixed in how far they go, you basically have to make it to the same spot off stage every time, and then use the recovery move. This makes some recoveries predictable and easy to intercept. If you know what kind of recovery your opponent has, you know they can't make it back unless they make it to that specific spot. Covering that spot with an aerial is a solid way to edgeguard. This is of course countered by predicting your opponents will try to do this, and making an early recovery, which is more risky since you probably won't snap ledge the same way. This is of course a bit of a simplification. Some characters even have several special moves to recover with, which makes things a lot more complicated. But I just wanted to underline how Steve basically never has to worry about any of this, being able to fire this off at almost any point. The move not just having the reach to make it back from anywhere, but can also make a path that's really tricky to intercept, making it really difficult to account for the timings he can use. Oftentimes you're better off not even trying. Like, it's amazing how much distance you can really get out of this move. The final straw that really puts this move into the true privileged top tier category is the fact that, the move literally has its own ledge grab hitbox. That's way bigger than any other character in the game. Like, if that's not literal privilege, I don't know what is. It's a massive ledge grab hitbox, which is made specifically for Steve when he's using this move. Otherwise he uses this one, which is his normal ledge grab range. Nearly every character in the game uses their regular ledge grab hitbox for detecting ledge when using their up Bs, and some of them can be really strict sometimes. Meanwhile, Steve over here gets to have like 3 Steve's worth of ledge grab disjoint, making him able to grab it from way below ledge if he wants to. It's a little absurd. I feel like the potency of Steve's recovery is likely one of the most overlooked points when talking about him. If he had an actual bad recovery, or even a mediocre one, I feel the character would have been a lot easier to deal with. If you overextend off stage while trying to hit him, he'll get back for sure, so the risk is not usually worth it. Because even if you do hit him, unless it KOs, he'll likely make it back no problem, with the combination of the extra jump from Minecart and Elytra alone. While it's fine for certain characters to have recoveries like this, I think Steve is just one of those characters that does not deserve to have it. Yet, here we are. I do also find it a little strange that despite being a very resource-intensive thing in actual Minecraft, it spends no resources at all in Smash. It's all on the house. If it actually needed some kind of resource, even if it was just dirt or redstone or something like that, it would go a long way to not only balance the recovery, but also be a good way to make Steve bleed a little bit more during his disadvantage state. It's not like there aren't already characters that need a certain resource to be able to recover, and I feel like it would have been a good fit for Steve to have something like that. Like, imagine if the move worked like Minecart, where you had a much slower version of the move if you had no redstone. And with redstone when it was fast and unpredictable like it is now, he'd have to be a little bit more careful when using his resources, mainly the powered minecarts, which I genuinely think would be a good way to make the character feel a little bit more helpless off stage. You would have to balance your offense and defense a little bit more. If you spent more redstone using your minecart, you might leave yourself more vulnerable off stage, if they don't get hit by it. In a way, it could make for some fun dynamic gameplay. TNT is one of those really weird moves that despite being pretty complicated in how it works, I really don't have much to say about. I have yet to really see this move be used all that effectively. It seems like something Steve players just kind of throw out when they want to freak out their opponents a little bit. Steve places down TNT and it acts like a block on the ground. TNT takes up 50 points worth of value from the meter, which is actually quite a lot. You then have the option to spend some redstone and make a trail with a pressure plate at the end. If anyone steps on the plate, the TNT will explode. If you hit the TNT before this, it'll start counting down and explode on its own, at which point you can no longer detonate it by the plate. Which I have to say, the way they decided to do the TNT flash is just so bizarre. It flickers normally for so long, before very quickly flashing faster and then exploding. Feels like it should slowly start flickering faster and faster at a constant rate, right? So you actually know when it's gonna explode for sure. It always feels like it's going to blow up way earlier than it actually does. I guess there's not really a problem with that, but I've always just kind of found it a little bit weird. The TNT has 20% health, and if it's stacked and brought down to 0, it will explode just like that as well. The move just kinda has a bunch of weird interactions all around. I see people really scared to approach when Steve puts down this move, usually because they don't really know how it behaves. But honestly, it's not such a huge deal to maneuver around. If he has the redstone trail, it can be a little bit scary, but just keeping your distance until it explodes by itself is never really a good idea, since it gives Steve a ton of time to mine. In all fairness, the move does a ton of damage if you get hit by it, the triggered explosion being a lot stronger than a normal detonation one. However, given the amount of resources you need to use it, there's usually a reason why you don't see this move a lot. Still, it can be fun to add into one of those wacky blocks and TNTs and Anvil and Minecart situations, where you just press all the special buttons and see what happens. But TNT is far from an important move, and honestly that's pretty refreshing to see. Steve's F Smash is quite the move. It's another one of those moves that really go crazy when you get diamond tools. When you have anything less than diamond, it's still pretty strong, but it doesn't have the disproportionate KO range that moves like back air and Anvil have. This move is just kinda silly, to be honest. Like, the diamond version is even stronger than Lil Mac's F Smash, which is kinda supposed to be one of the strongest in the game. It can KO absurdly early in some cases if you have rage. It can easily take stocks at like 60 to 70% if you're close to the ledge. The hitbox is pretty massive, and has no sour spots at all. The whole move is just a clean sweet spot. It also has a really good animation connected to it. Steve just kinda steps forwards, which gives it some extra reach in that sense. Since I've already been over my thoughts on diamond tools being too strong, there isn't too much more to say here. It's just another case of that. However, this one is like by far the most explosive one. It can kinda come out of nowhere, and Steve players love to fish for this, especially when they have rage. Out of all the moves that KO too early, this one is really the worst offender. It feels unnatural for a move that is this fast and easy to throw out, to deal this much damage and knockback. Like, you get hit by this move and you sometimes want to just go check the settings to see if the game's correct, but no, the move is actually just that strong. They even specifically made this move a little extra powerful for its diamond version, it having more knockback than the other versions, despite also dealing more damage. So it's not like this was an accident or something, they deliberately made this move this powerful, which is definitely quite interesting. Down smash is close to being one of Steve's more mediocre moves, but of course they threw in a few things to make it at least usable in some cases. Steve pours lava on the ground, which causes a bunch of hitboxes to appear, both of which are fairly strong and launch away. It's a fine move on its own, it has all the drawbacks of down smashes that hit both sides like this, like if you miss the front part it leaves you wide open. However, the thing that gives this move just that little DLC flair to it is that the lava technically falls as a projectile and has gravity off ledge, which makes it a very handy tool for hitting people when recovering. The move is not too slow either, so it's not exactly hard to time it. However, it does have enough lag to make the prospect not worth it a lot of the time, since Steve has many other ledge trapping tools that are less risky than this. But still, it's another option that he has and is technically useful. But overall, this is one of his less used moves. I don't really know how to talk about up smash really. On its own, it's a fairly solid anti-air that can catch people landing if they don't air dodge through it, and sometimes it can catch even that. It does have a pretty quick scoop hitbox as well, which launches into the magma block, making it a useful punish tool as well. However, if you do miss it, despite it being pretty big, you'll likely eat a heavy punish afterwards. In this sense, I think the move is actually pretty well made. It KOs maybe a little bit earlier than I would have liked, but which one of Steve's moves don't do that, to be fair? Of course, the thing that makes this move a little bit more criminal is the use of it during nil combos, as I mentioned earlier. It's pretty obvious they didn't intend for you to be able to land this move this high up, or at least they didn't imagine you would be able to combo into it at that high up. And so the strong knockback of the move really makes this a nasty finisher for Steve's up tilt combos, capable of stealing stocks from very low percentages. Though to be fair here, I think the fault really does once again lay with blocks, and how they inadvertently make this move a lot better than it was intended to. Seems to happen a lot, huh? On its own, the move would have been a pretty good, but not risk-free smash attack, but now it's a deadly finisher to a really broken combo. I really don't have too much to say about dash attack. It's very simple, just Steve swinging his pickaxe forwards, while having two massive hitboxes around him. The move is pretty strong and has a lot of active frames, but I really can't justify complaining about a move that is just a little pushed, compared to a lot of the other moves we've seen so far. It's a fine move, it can KO, but at like a reasonable percent. So it's like, fine, you know. This one gets a thumbs up. Kind of. I wish it had less active frames, though it's not too bad. Speaking of moves I don't really have too much to say about, down tilt. This one is very strange. Steve creates a little fire using some flint and steel. Steve just kinda stands there and admires the fire until it goes away. If you get hit by it, you'll be launched, and that's really it. The move technically has very little lag, as in the time between the final hit and when you can move again. You can drop it off a ledge, where it will fall a bit before vanishing, which can be really annoying for certain characters, I would imagine. But the angle it launches at is not too sharp, so you should probably be able to get back anyways. It's definitely one of Steve's less good moves, which is perfectly fine. All in all, Steve's moveset is incredibly powerful, with almost no bad moves to speak of, and some of the most outrageous specials in the game. There is a reason why this character has become the powerhouse he is, with moves that cover basically every bad situation he could find himself in, and the tools to completely flip the way the game is played on its head. I don't think it's unfair to say that this character is quite overpowered. The idea of this character somehow being held back by mining obviously backfired, not only because what little mining you do need to do is not nearly enough to offset the absurdity of the specials that use them, but also largely because mining can be used to your own benefit, in the form of forcing opponents to approach you. The moveset is all around very solid, and makes for a character with very few exploitable weaknesses, all of which are covered by moves that are very scary to interact with. Now, with us having covered nearly every aspect about this character, I hope you've gotten a good idea of why this character is so strong. The devil really is in the details with this character. I wanted to break down not just how his moves are so strong, but also why, which is why a lot of this was explaining Smash more contextually, more so than a top-down analysis. But now that you've seen this character for exactly who they are, nether warts and all, I think it's time for us to enter the final chapter of this video. In the following years, Aquila would continue to perform exceedingly well, winning several majors, and never usually ranking outside of the top 3. Alongside Onin, they kept Steve on the map and alive in everyone's minds. With a huge surge in popularity, Steve was one of the most common characters to show up in top 64s. Steve really seemed like the threat at the moment, and when the Smash community sees anything resembling a threat, well, they complain about it mainly. But in this case, the movement to institute a ban became more and more of a reality. During the following years, We would see a lot more effort to make this happen. So I guess I've beaten around the bush long enough. Let's talk about banning Steve and how that happened. Now, there's a lot to be said on this topic, but let me start off by saying that the concept of banning a character outright is a very extreme measure to take, and should really only be reserved for situations where there is simply no other option, and the character is causing significant, demonstrable harm to the metagame overall. Mainly has a few banned techniques that you can't use, like wobbling, where all you need is a single grab, and through some ice climber funkiness, you could basically grab an opponent forever. Because of how badly it polarized the gameplay against ice climbers, doing this in particular was banned. I'm not really much more of a fan of banning a certain technique from the game like this. It can very often just complicate playing the game more, in a way that I really don't think it needs to, but in this case it was likely the best way to go about it. It was either that or banning the character as a whole, but the example still stands. It's a good pointer of how bad something has to be before it reasonably should be taken action against, as in completely warping the matchup to revolve around a single thing. Steve might seem like he fits this bill then, as we talked about how much blocks really do make the game very different, but despite this, I really don't think blocks are enough to warrant a ban alone. Wobbling is a completely one-dimensional gameplay aspect. It really just comes down to do not get grabbed, but blocks are at least a lot more dynamic in the way they change the game. I still think blocks are a bit of a bad thing for the game overall, but that alone is not really enough. In my opinion, and again this is just my thoughts on the matter, I'm sure you might disagree, the most important thing to keep in mind is how the character is doing at top level play. If Little Timmy goes to a local and loses to a Steve player, more often than not that's because the player is better than Timmy, and not just because they're playing the best character in the game. Lower level players always have a lot more unused skill to tap into, by virtue of not being a top player obviously. I'm of course not saying that we shouldn't take low or mid level play into account, but it's way harder to really say why someone loses or wins at this level. You will frequently see people play janky low tiers and win against top tiers, just because at that level, the biggest factor is largely experience, and what character you play matters less. But in top level play, you almost never see this, unless your name is SkyJ. Top players are top players because they're able to bring out the most in their characters, so why would they limit themselves to anything that's not among the best characters in the game, when they are among the few players actually capable of reaching that skill ceiling? Anyone can drive a fast car, but if you don't know how to drive it well, then it doesn't really matter how fast it goes, since you have to slow down in the turns anyways. Obviously, a skilled driver will want the fastest car they could get, and in the same way, intrinsically picking up a top tier character will not make you instantly better at the game, since you still lack the necessary skill to use them to that degree. But what if they made a car that was not just the fastest, but was so fast that it doesn't even matter if you have to slow down, and was so easy to drive that it made you able to compete with real high-level drivers? You can probably see where I'm going with this. If a character is so good that it can elevate players who would otherwise not be able to perform at this level, then that would be a real problem. We saw something kinda like this back in Smash 4, where there was a huge influx of Bayonetta players that previously did not have much notable results suddenly showing up in top 8s. If a character might feel overpowered at lower levels of play, but has a hard time showing up in top level play, there's a pretty good chance the top players have figured out something you haven't. However, if several people suddenly show up with the same character, and are suddenly able to beat highly ranked players, then that is in fact a bit problematic. It's a lot more likely in a case like this that the character might just be a little too good, and not just that these players suddenly became really good out of nowhere. This in turn would basically force other top players to also play this character, and this would cause a feedback loop until basically everybody plays said character. This is of course a pretty hyperbole situation, and not one that happens unless a character is really broken. But there are cases like this with Brawl Meta Knight and Smash 4 for example. If you really want to win, you would be doing yourself a massive disservice by not playing either of these characters. Basically what you want to avoid is there being a character that is so much better than everyone else that you are directly losing out by not playing them. So how does Steve fall into this then? Well, while it's pretty clear that Steve is the best character in the game, not only is it very clear that you don't need to play him to do well, but the amount of top level Steve players is actually really low. It feels safe to say that the character is not really in any danger of over-centralizing the metagame. This could change of course, but at the moment I think things are fine. If we look at usage statistics from 2023, we'll see that Steve makes up about 4% of the metagame, which is really not a lot, and the characters behind him are only so by 1%. So if Steve is neither taking over top level or mid level play, I can't really get behind banning the character based purely on vibes alone, or disdain for the character. Sadly, being an annoying character to fight against is not illegal. Oh, believe me, I wish it was. And yeah, of course I do think the character is very silly, and definitely could have used a round of nerfs, but if you're really going to ban a character, you really need a good reason to, and make a strong foundation for why you think the character is bad for the game. I am open to the idea of banning characters, but recklessly shooting and asking questions later is never a good idea. It's innocent until proven guilty, and at the moment, despite his criminal demeanor, Steve is innocent. Another reason I hear being thrown around is banning Steve for the sake of viewership. The idea that people will stop watching tournaments because Steve is boring to watch. And if we're going to start weighing how entertaining characters are to watch, that opens up a whole can of beans that is just a big mess. Like, I personally think Steve is not even that bad to watch really. Like, sure, he's a little bit overpowered, but that kind of makes for a fun scenario, where you kind of have an underdog story, where one player is trying to beat the odds, so to say. And even still, I think that as far as interesting playstyles go, Steve does have some fun stuff. Like, sure, he tends to camp a bit with the walls, but that still usually does make for some some creative and interesting mind games, even if Steve does have the advantage. To contrast this with watching a character like Sonic, which is just kinda like watching someone slowly sink into quicksand. It's just kinda sad and ends about as well too. Obviously this is not a great point. It's a competition first and entertainment second, and I don't really think you should mess with that. All of these arguments are well and good, but none of them really made any real impact. That would be until one of the biggest pushes for banning this character came after the discovery of PMLG, which I suppose I should talk about here. I'll keep it brief, but on the 25th of February, 2023, PMLG was discovered. A tech that allows Steve to seemingly ignore hit stun from certain attacks, and escape combos he otherwise would not be able to. On the surface, of course, this seems really strong, and it led to the biggest amount of bannings the character had ever seen. The community made a huge deal out of this discovery. However, when the dust settled, the tech ended up being significantly less useful than estimated. I'm not really gonna pretend like I know exactly how it works, but basically if you use an attack, and then place a block, just at the right time while you're getting hit, you can cancel the hit stun, and then perform any move you would like. Usually this would be an air dodge, which allows you to escape certain moves you definitely were not intended to. Importantly, this only works in the air, but you can see why this would be really good. It seemed truly game-breaking, but as it turned out, the application for this tech is either really difficult or not actually that useful. You still need to have that one single frame where you can place the block, which true combos don't allow for. It also has to be a move that does not put you into tumble. If you don't know the difference, that's before the character starts leaving smoke trails when launched, and when you land afterwards, you have to tech in order to not fall to the ground, which significantly reduced the amount of moves it could be used on. So only weak hits and multi-hits are fair game. For multi-hits, the timing on the B button is not only extremely strict, but it also varies from move to move, meaning you have to memorize exactly which frames the window exists at for every character in the game, let alone actually hitting that small window in a 60 frames per second game, while also playing in a real match. Single hits are a little bit easier since the timing is less strict. However, there just aren't a lot of single hit moves that don't put you into tumble outside of very early presents. Outside of all that, just setting up PMGL in the first place is pretty clunky. Just having to throw out an attack in anticipation of getting hit in the first place is kinda pointless. You could instead just actually try to avoid it or challenge it with a move of your own. Even if the tech was easier to do, its usefulness is still pretty questionable. Usually when Steve does this, he'll air dodge, which combined with his floaty full speed and gravity will not really get him out of harm's way a lot of the time, as your opponent can likely just punish him once he lands. This is of course granted that they are ready for it, which I don't think most people are, but even then sometimes you can just react to it without much issue. There are probably some situations where it can be really good, but it needing to be set up like this, and requiring very precise inputs to even use, I can see why the tech has been basically unimplemented in competitive play from even the top players of the character, which I think says more about the tech's viability than anything else. Obviously, it's not a good enough reason to ban this character. However, the biggest and probably harshest reality about wanting to ban this character, even if I did agree that it was warranted, is just the logistics of doing so. Smash doesn't really have any global governing body that decides how tournaments should be run. There's a reason why 6 years later, we still can't agree on which stages should be legal. So when it comes to prohibiting the use of an entire character, the enforcement of that is going to be practically impossible. Tournaments usually follow the guidelines of the region they're based in. If they have some kind of organization that keeps track of that, then that's up to them, and what kind of rules the tournament will be using, what stages are legal and which ones are starters or counterpicks. And of course in this case, if a character should be banned or not. Some things we practically all agree on, that the game should be played 3 stocks, 8 minutes. It's just really not up for debate, and basically everyone agrees that it's the best way to play the game. 2 stocks is just not enough, and 4 makes the game go on a little too long. It's so clearly the best option that the overwhelming majority of people agree on it. Therefore it's possible to actually have that be the case everywhere, as an actual enforced standard. But when it comes to more subjective topics like stages, and especially characters, people have widely different thoughts on the matter. As you can imagine, when people were trying to get this character banned, it just led to certain areas banning the character, while he remained mostly legal in other places. This is mostly how it is to this day as well. A lot of places have lifted the ban, which just leaves us with this messy situation where he is semi-banned. Basically what I'm saying is that unless the character is so obviously ban-worthy that there's no doubt, it's basically impossible to actually make a ban happen. Even if the character was very problematic, it would have to be crystal clear that the character was unhealthy for the metagame before any reasonable action could be taken. There might come a day where there's 6 Steves in top 8 and the character makes up 20% of the metagame, but until we get even close to that, I find it a bit unnecessary to champion a ban for this character. And it seems like most people are on the same page these days. In fact, Steve has kinda seen a decline in recent times, Akala being the only Steve to consistently make top 8s anymore. If anything, Steve stocks are now at a relative all-time low, Akala really being the only one who's keeping the banner up. If you were to ban Steve at this point, it would basically be the same as banning the one player who's doing really well with the character. But maybe on one hand that's exactly what we need. Okay, I'm actually down for banning Steve as long as we also ban Sonic. So, here we are. Today, Steve is still regarded as the best character in the game, topping both community-voted tier lists. There's basically not much doubt that he's not just the best character in the game, but maybe even a little too good overall. All the drama surrounding the character has come and gone, and looking back at it, it's very representative of the community as a whole. But I guess after the horrible time that was Smash 4 Bayonetta, I guess I can't fault people for being a little on edge. But now looking back, it's pretty obvious that Steve has not been the end of Smash Ultimate. The game is healthier than ever, and while some of the meta characters right now are maybe not my favorite, there's still a lot of people playing a wide array of characters. And while Steve might be the most used character, he's only so by a little bit, and the character variety in the game is still really pronounced. It's one of the real great things about this game, I feel. The amount of good, viable characters is really high, and even the less good characters are still quite usable, though having a few more flaws of course. There are still a large number of Steve players doing well with them at mid to high level, however most of these players seem to have a hard time reaching the top 8 level. So despite the character being both popular and strong, it seems the Steve takeover is still some years away. More and more top players have played with the idea of using Steve in tournament, which will definitely be an interesting development going forwards. However, I have my doubts that many will stick with him or really do well with him. Steve has a very specific playstyle to him, which I think many people might not be totally on board with. It's probably one of the least talked about aspects about this game, but I really feel like player expression is very important. A lot of people are simply not interested in playing Steve because his gameplay clashes heavily with the playstyles they might like playing. If you like fast, aggressive characters, you'll not find that here. And I do think that enjoying playing a certain character is very important to actually being able to do well with them. There's probably many characters that might not be as strong, but fit a player's playstyle a lot more. There's so much identity tied up with the character you play, and there's a lot of people who play characters that are usually not that good or mediocre just because they like the character. It's obviously especially good if the character you like also happens to be top tier, but if you are a top player, why would you sacrifice that for a character you might not even like playing that much, or even be able to perform much better with, especially when a lot of top players have proven that their character can not only beat Steve, but also win entire tournaments. I can't exactly say what's going to happen in the future. For all I know, some other random player might just pick up the character and take over the meta completely. On the other end, I find it a lot more likely that things will just kinda stay the way they are. Steve might be a little broken, but is not so oppressive that he can't be dealt with. The character does have weaknesses, despite the designers doing a very good job covering them up, and I still think the community has a long way to go as far as figuring out counterplay and dealing with some of the things Steve does. I see that top players are sometimes a little stubborn in how they approach matchups, sometimes being a little too comfortable with their own playstyles, so when they quite literally meet a wall, I feel a lot of them don't know exactly what to do. It's gotten a lot better in recent times, but I do think there's a lot left to be learned in how to properly fight this character, but only time will tell how that goes. And I think it's about time I start wrapping up this video anyways. I have been pretty harsh in some of the assessments I made of this character, and I think a lot of that is warranted really. It's necessary to shine some perspective on why the character is the way it is, but please don't use this as some kind of justification to degrade people who play this character, or any character for that matter. There is a very big line between disliking a character and disliking anyone who plays that character, and I want to make that very clear. Sonic is by far my least favorite character in this game, and I'm sure I'll go into that one day, but I still have a lot of respect for players like Sonic's, who is able to push the character in ways nobody has ever seen before, in the same way that players like Akala have brought Steve's dominance to light. And to discredit that just because they're playing a character you might find a little too good is not just misguided, but rude as well. Just wanted to get that out there. Steve is without a doubt one of the most interesting characters ever to be added to this game. I really could keep talking about so many more aspects of this character, but I think I've encapsulated everything I wanted to bring up. I hope you've gotten some insight into not just how, but why this character is so powerful. The way he twists the game in a way that no other character is capable of, and I hope you can see the exact way that he goes about doing so. The character is quite overpowered, whether it's because of exploits that happened to work out for him, or his design having been pushed into territories it maybe shouldn't have. Regardless of how we got here, these are the facts, and we have to deal with them. Despite what you might think after watching all of this, I don't even really dislike this character. I played him a lot in preparation of this video, and I have to say that he's pretty fun. I was surprised to see that I actually kinda enjoyed the character. That could be because I finally got to be on the delivering end of some of these moves for once. I am sure that contributed in some fashion, but aside from that, he is a fun character. And I really don't mind fighting him too much either. It's not my favorite matchup, but it's fine. I personally don't even mind watching the character either, as I find people trying to figure out this character quite entertaining. There's a lot of other characters that I find way less fun on every level really, and in that way Steve is fine really. He's a fun character concept that maybe, and I do believe mostly unknowingly, was pushed a little too far. I don't see a time where this character is not considered the best in the game, and with all we've gone through here today, you can probably see why. It really seems like they named this one Ultimate for a reason, so unless they port this game at some point, or actually patch it out of nowhere, this is probably the Ultimate we're gonna have to play with for a very long time, and Steve will likely maintain a big role in that. But if I have to be honest, I think it could have been way worse. Comparing this game to the previous ones, meta variety is at an all-time high, not just because the game has more characters, but more of them are actually viable. Despite a few unfortunate hiccups towards the end, all things considered, I think they did a great job with this game. There's a reason why I'm still interested in and talking about it to this day. There's a reason why people still run and make huge tournaments. The game is more alive than it's ever been. And that's not because of or in spite of Steve being a part of it. It's because the game is great, and will likely continue to thrive in the future. But with that, I suppose only time will tell. So I hope you had a good time watching this, and I'll see you later.